Hogwarts, the first capitalist of the magical world. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 353, The Ultimate Good Father Grindelwald. Thank you for the compliment. Karl asked casually, his face calm, and as if he had just remembered something. By the way, you said that Dumbledore asked you to find me. What exactly did he want from me? If you have any questions, just ask. I have time to answer them now. I don't think that's necessary. Grindelwald also had a calm expression on his face. He tilted his head and looked at Cole with a hint of teasing in his eyes. You are such a smart person. How could you not guess that what he wants to ask is nothing more than to make you break? And a hint of serious dissatisfaction with your not having written to him for so many days. But how do you want me to answer him? Tell him that his dear adopted son has no intention of breaking at all, and I have already regarded him as the final scapegoat, ready to put him on the altar at any time. You are making it very difficult for me, Kit. Hearing this, Karl just glanced at the other person with his eyes slanted and then said expressionlessly, I don't have to go home this Christmas, so I can use the holiday to sort out things in Europe, to lay the groundwork for the next story. I know what to do. The moment Karl said that he could not go home for Christmas, a smile immediately appeared on Grindelwald's face. This handsome old man with white hair and beard truly expressed his happiness for the first time at this moment. With a smug smile on his face, he pushed the pile of keys in front of Karl and said happily, It's always a pleasure to deal with smart people. These are yours, Kit. Have fun in Europe. Have a wonderful and sweet Christmas. At the same time, as a father, I still want to ask one thing. You sure you don't want to tell Mr. Diggory about this? Shut up, you disgusting old man. Karl glared at Grindelwald. Grindelwald waved his hands and said with a smile, Don't be angry, kid. This is just my concern as a father. If you don't want to answer, it's up to you. I like this Christmas gift very much. I hope you can be nicer to me next time we talk. After he finished speaking, Karl only felt a flash before his eyes, and he suddenly appeared in a corner of London International Airport. That bar and that handsome old man had long since disappeared without a trace. The speed of the whole process is really unimaginable, and at the same time, the body does not feel any discomfort from being squeezed. Sure enough, he is not worthy of being Grindelwald. With this level of magic manipulation, Voldemort probably can't even match a toe. Karl looked at the people coming and going in the airport, muttered to himself, and then prepared to get up to buy a plane ticket. However, he didn't expect that as soon as he stood up, a first-class ticket of British Airways would slide down from his seat. A blue sticky note was also attached. For your Christmas gift, when you come back, remember to buy a bunch of golden sunflowers in Paris and mail it to the address below. Don't forget your mother. She is still angry with you. By the way, I have stored some rare golden rose seeds in the vault in London. Give it to Ms. Rosier. I owe her that for Christmas. What a damn old bastard. He even didn't forget to cheat his own child before leaving. Looking at the words on the note, Karl felt his eyes twitching wildly, making himself stand in for his biological father giving gifts to the adoptive mother who raised him. The key point is that there is an unclear relationship between the two. Just thinking about this logic gives me a headache. But even so, Karl had nothing to say, but just as he was about to put away the note in front of him, a small flame of orchid is needed as evidence to defend yourself when conflicts may arise in the future. It suddenly caught fire and burned the note completely. Looking at the scattered ashes in his hands, even though they were probably 100 kilometers away, Karl could still hear someone's wild laughter in the dark. Damn old man. Karl cursed angrily, brushed off the ashes on his hands, turned around and walked into the airport. Since it was a first-class ticket, and the old man did have some power, the fake identity he arranged for him was very high-end. In less than a moment, Karl passed through the VIP channel and arrived at the first-class cabin of the plane and sat down. Karl, who had just arrived in the cabin, did not sit down in his seat directly, but kept looking around at the same time. Magic was used to conduct magic sensing scans on all the passengers who boarded the plane one after another. After making sure that there were only muggles on the plane and no wizards, Karl sat down in his seat. He slowly leaned his body against the sofa, looked out the window at the airport, and shook his head helplessly. He had never been so confused as he was at this moment. Logically speaking, all the plans were going according to plan. I have finally put an end to the memories of the past, and I should feel happy. But the reality is, sitting in this extremely quiet first class cabin, Karl just feels extremely lonely and confused. The surroundings seemed a little too quiet. Maybe I had become accustomed to the noisy life with a cat and a dog around me. Thinking of this, Karl first smiled unconsciously and then immediately shook his head continuously. No, you can't have such an idea. If you take Cedric to France, it will be a terrible disaster. It's scary to think about. Karl comforted himself and constantly emphasized this to himself in his mind to help himself strengthen his confidence. But no matter how he emphasized it to himself, that feeling of loneliness and emptiness could never go away. Helpless, he could only prepare to call the flight attendant and drink a glass of warm milk so that he could fall asleep quickly. But just as he stretched out his hand and was about to press the button to call the stewardess, there was a sudden noisy sound behind me, and a flight attendant was shouting at the top of her lungs, "Sir, you cannot bring such dangerous items into the aircraft cabin. Please take off the mask on your face. We need to verify your identity." When he first heard this voice, Karl just sneered. It seemed that London was about to become like Florida in the United States. There are weird things everywhere, but when I think about it, I can't help but feel a little nervous. I quickly stood up and looked back, and sure enough, I saw a man in a high-end black suit. He wore a golden mask covered with intricate patterns on his face, and held two large plastic bags in his hands. There were some strange objects inside, even an exposed gas tank. Looking at this strange flower that was being desperately controlled by the two stewardesses, Karl roared in his heart with a wry smile on his face. "Grindelwald, it's my honor to have a wild father like you." At this time, in the suburbs of London, in a suburban market, an old man who was quietly selecting ingredients suddenly smiled meaningfully. Chapter 354 Super Invincible Serial Bit. It's really shocking, Mr. Cedric. Cole was sitting in his crowded first class cabin. Looking at Cedric taking off his mask, his cheeks twitched wildly. The first class cabin was originally spacious enough for people to lie down. At this time, there was another guy sitting opposite me, and there were two huge plastic bags at my feet. If it weren't for the bright decorations around him, Carol would have thought he was on a freight train. Can you explain why you brought these things? Also, why are you here? Karl stared at Cedric in front of him, and the other party was like a golden retriever who had done something wrong. He hung his head and muttered softly, "It's not my fault. We took a plane to the United States and other countries before. I can bring any luggage I want, right? Why can't I bring anything this time?" Hearing this, Carol almost laughed out of anger. He took a deep breath, stretched out his hands, and held the other person's face. He forced the other person to raise his head and looked into his eyes. "Don't you understand the difference between a private jet and a regular plane? You didn't notice it when you got on the plane. There are a lot more passengers around us. And don't avoid my question just now. Why are you here? Who told you that? Tell me clearly now, or I will kick you off the plane right now." Hearing this, Cedric seemed to have just woken up from a dream and tried hard to break free from Karl's restraints. After the plane took off smoothly, he returned to his seat, pretended to be sitting upright, and looked at Cole with a serious expression. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came out. Helplessly, he quickly bent down and searched in his two large plastic bags, then took out a familiar dark blue note. He cleared his throat and spoke loudly, "Please, watch your words, Mr. Hohenzollern. My name is Ludwig von Eisenstein. He is a famous German wizard noble, the eldest son of the Eisenstein family, and the most loyal servant of the Grindelwald family. He usually wears a golden mask, guards Grindelwald's heir, and they have been together for a long time. It has sprouted. That's enough." Looking at this idiot, he read out the note verbatim. Even the annotation on the back point Carol's head was full of black lines. He snatched the note from the other person's hand and tore it into pieces. I haven't finished reading it yet. Cedric, or Ludwig von Eisenstein, suddenly shouted. What's written on the back? That I haven't finished reading yet. Hearing this, Karl risked being exposed and used magic to burn the pieces of paper into ashes. Finally, he blew away the ashes with his mouth until they disappeared into the cabin point. Then he grabbed Cedric by the collar and stared at him viciously. I don't care if your name is Cedric Diggory or Ludwig von whatever. When the plane gets to Paris, get on the plane and return to London immediately. I don't want to waste any more time on you. This is non-negotiable. Do you understand me? No. Cedric, who was grabbed by the collar, pouted his mouth high, and every pore of his face exuded the word rebellion. He looked into Karl's eyes fearlessly and spoke seriously. No, I'm not going back. What did you say? Karl's face became a little ferocious and his voice became much louder. The aura emanating from his body seemed as if he wanted to eat Cedric alive. Cedric on the other side didn't seem prepared to resist. He closed his eyes tightly, as if ready to let the other party do whatever he wanted. Sir, please return to your seat and refrain from using violence in the cabin. Otherwise, we will detain you according to law. Just when the situation reached a stalemate, a patrolling flight attendant broke the deadlock between the two. The other party held the intercom in his hand, his eyes fixed on Karl's hand that was holding Cedric's collar. Helpless, Karl could only let go of Cedric and sat back in his seat with a dark face. It was not until the flight attendant had served the meals and the entire cabin had fallen into silence that Karl used magic to yell at Cedric. I returned to London as soon as I got off the plane. Did you hear me? I heard it, but I don't. Why? Give me a reason why you must go to France with me. I won't give it to you, and I should be the one asking you this question. Why do you want to go to France? Who is there in France? I'm going to work to pave the way for future plans. That's great. I'm going to work too. You. Karl couldn't stand it anymore. He pulled open the door of the first class cabin and stared at Cedric in the cabin on the other side. Cedric was equally unwilling to be outdone and opened the door to his own box as well. Separated by a narrow aisle, Carol and I stared at each other. You must leave immediately, otherwise it will cause trouble for the subsequent work. This is my last warning to you. Karl spoke first, his eyes full of threats. Cedric responded sharply, with a look of disdain on his face. What kind of trouble will it cause? I'm afraid that in Mr. Hohenzollern's impression, some poor abandoned guy is the biggest trouble. We agreed to spend the holidays quietly, but you suddenly want to go to France. I think you have evil intentions. A biased fool. What the hell? Cole was stunned for a few seconds, then looked at Cedric viciously, as if he wanted to eat him. Mr. Cedric Diggory, please watch your words. I'm your boss. Hearing this, Cedric remained calm and pretended to be serious, even speaking English with a German accent. He directly retorted, Mr. Karl Hohenzollern. Oh no, it should be Miss Theodora Grindelwald. Please be careful with your address. I'm your loyal subordinate. I'm not Cedric Diggory. My name is Ludwig von Eisenstein, your most loyal and caring subordinate and friend. After saying that, he closed the door of the box directly. At the last moment of closing the door, he stared at Carol closely, raised a finger and said seriously, there is no one at the same time. Crack. After he finished speaking, the door of the box closed tightly. Looking at the closed door, Carol felt his temple twitching. He punched the air like a madman and gasped for breath. On the other side, Cedric, who was hiding in the box, had a rare relaxed smile on his face. He quietly took out a piece of blue paper from his pocket, on which was a line of densely written words. Don't be afraid of that kid's threats. He is more afraid of losing his friends than anyone else. You can control him by grasping this point. Enclosed with this letter is 100 formulas for getting along with the Hohenzollerns, written by Severus Snape. It is at the bottom left of the plastic bag. Have fun, boy, and happy holidays. I hope you like this gift. Gellert Grindelwald. Chapter 355. Mr. Cedric, who writes a diary during Christmas. Paris International Airport is surrounded by a strong festive atmosphere. As soon as I entered the airport lobby, I could see a huge Christmas tree decorated with colorful lights and ornaments. There are snowmen and Santa Claus models of various shapes placed next to it, making people feel like they are in a fairy tale world. In the departure hall, melodious Christmas songs are played softly, bringing a touch of warmth and comfort to the waiting passengers. Of course, they are in French. The staff also changed into festive costumes. Some wore Santa hats, and some wore uniforms with Christmas element, but some people still find it very strange. Won't you feel cold wearing so little in the middle of winter? One of them, a man wearing very short jeans, tried to touch my hand while handing out holiday gifts, which made me feel very uncomfortable, but he didn't succeed. When he stretched out his hand, Karl, who had been beside me, glared at him. He fell asleep in public, so I'm a bit off topic. Overall, the staff at Paris airports are very friendly, with smiles on their faces. They distributed small gifts and blessings to the travelers passing by. Some shops and restaurants also launched special holiday menus and products to attract the attention of travelers. In a corner of Paris International Airport, Cedric was sitting quietly on his suitcase. He has developed a habit of writing and drawing in the diary he carries with him over the years, recording the new things he sees every day. Of course, while recording, there are also Mr. Degore's unique complaints. It's strange to say, but in the past, he often didn't even need a diary to record enough content for a whole school year, but since I met Carol last year, the speed at which the diary is consumed has increased day by day. When I stand with Carol, he seemed to encounter new things every day, and when he thought of Carol, he couldn't help but feel a little angry. Earlier in the dormitory, Carol accidentally discovered himself writing in a diary, but that guy just glanced at him sideways with a half smile on his face. He said inexplicably, "I didn't expect you to keep a diary, Mr. Cedric. I thought you were a serious person." Now, it seems that I made a mistake in judgment. Who would write a diary if they were serious? I was very angry then, and I'm still very angry now. But when I think of those not so nice words I wrote in my other diary, as well as some unrealistic fantasies and surging anger, I didn't know what to do for a moment. It seems that the person who wrote those words does not seem like a serious person. Come and help me, idiot. What are you doing sitting there in a daze? Didn't you say you were here to work? Just when Cedric felt a little guilty, a roar suddenly came from behind him. The voice sounded very shrill and didn't sound like a boy's voice. Cedric didn't remember it until this voice appeared. It seemed like he had a job to do, and he was sitting here just to avoid some unsuspecting muggles breaking into the changing room at the back. Karl had been changing clothes behind his mother. Cedric felt his throat tighten at the thought and quickly put his diary away. He turned around stiffly and then, as expected, stood there in a daze. Does it look good? Karl, who had already finished his makeup, asked with a smile. It looks good. Cedric, who was standing there in a daze, nodded mechanically like a robot. Cedric knew that he must be very stupid the way he was, but he couldn't help it, and was convinced that he was not to blame. Carol in front of me was wearing a deep black skirt, the hem of which swayed gently in the breeze like a blooming flower even under the dim lights of the airport. His long golden hair still shone brightly, flowing over his shoulders like a waterfall. Her eyes sparkled like sapphires, deep and bright. Anne, maybe this guy had some bad idea again. He deliberately tilted his head slightly to make his neck look more slender, and the slightly upturned corners of his mouth revealed a naughty smile. Have you seen it? The smile was followed by a sudden change of expression, and the beautiful flowers that warmed people's hearts disappeared. The terrifying vampire queen came to the world, staring at him with a pair of blue eyes, and touched his neck in a way that was even more terrifying than Cedric. He was afraid that the other party would pounce on him and bite his neck off in the next second. But the next second, when Cedric saw those rosy and plump lips, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart, as if getting bitten is no big deal. No, how could I have such a dirty thought? But Soon after another second, he suddenly held his head with his hands, as if he had been hit by some terrible mind control black magic. He half knelt on the ground and kept hitting his suitcase with his big head, muttering to himself. Looking at Cedric, who suddenly went crazy in front of him, Cole was dumbfounded. He had arranged for him to wait here in the beginning. I didn't hold out much hope for this guy, and I had already cast a muggle repelling charm around him before entering the changing room. I just called him because the high heels on my feet were a little uncomfortable. He staggered so much that he almost fell and wanted the other person to help him up. But he never expected that this idiot would make 3 expressions in 6 seconds just by looking at him. Then he knelt on the ground like a house elf who had done something wrong and began to madly mutilate himself. What a sin. Karl sighed sadly and tried hard to control the high heels on his feet. Like a duck that has just learned to walk, he moved his legs forward step by step and slowly moved to Cedric's side. Looking at the idiot who was still banging his head against the suitcase. He did not want to lose his company in the future due to technical reasons. Karl stretched out his right hand, grabbed Cedric by the back of his neck, gently stroked his forehead with his left hand, leaned down and spoke softly in his ear. You don't need to punish yourself like this. I know you didn't mean it. Stop this stupid behavior immediately. These words are thoughtful, these actions are gentle, and the effect is not ineffective. Cedric, who was treated gently by Karl, shuddered all over, then crawled to the back using his hands and feet. He immediately distanced himself from Karl. His face looked like a ripe tomato, and he was breathing heavily. His eyes were filled with fear, grievance and unconcealable shyness. Seeing this, Cole was stunned. His hands stayed in the air for a few seconds before slowly putting them away. Then, without any ladylike manners, she casually threw the 2 high-heeled shoes on her feet aside. He walked barefoot up to Cedric, raised his right hand, and gave him a fierce slap. Chapter 356 The Quiet Princess and the Clumsy Knight. A crisp sound was heard, and I didn't know if it was an illusion or something else. Carol felt that after he slapped this guy, his eyes finally became a little normal. As if to say, yes, this is a Karl I know. When Karl saw this, he felt a surge of anger in his heart. It seemed that this damn clothes could not be worn casually, and it had begun to affect his mentality. On the other side, Cedric, who had been slapped, rubbed his face, which didn't hurt much. He knew that the other party didn't really want to hit him, so he quickly stood up and tried to pack his luggage to hide his embarrassment. But he had only taken 2 steps when he heard a loud shout from behind and was hit hard on the back. Karl used his fair and delicate feet to kick the fool in front of him hard on the back and spoke arrogantly in a voice changed by magic. Dear Mr. Ludwig von Eisenstein, my most loyal and reliable subordinate, shouldn't you help me put on my shoes first? Cedric turned around with horror in his eyes and stared at Karl blankly. I saw that my luggage had run to Carol's side without me knowing when, and the other party was sitting on my suitcase. With her legs crossed, only the white feet were facing her, and in the distance there were only 2 bright red high-heeled shoes. As for Cedric, he just glanced at Karl's bare soles and his face, which had finally returned to normal. His face turned red visibly, and then he slapped himself in the face, as if he was having a mental attack. Completely different from Karl's previous slap that was just for show. Cedric was really cruel to himself this time. A bright red palm print instantly appeared on her fair face, and tears overflowed from the corners of her eyes. What's wrong with this guy today? Is there something wrong with him? Cole was startled by the slap and looked at Cedric with some fear on the other side. Cedric felt much better after slapping himself until he cried. Like someone who finally woke up, she quickly ran over and picked up the 2 high-heeled shoes. He placed the high heels at Karl's feet. Karl habitually wanted to stand up and put on his high heels, but he didn't expect that his body didn't have time to move. But I felt a different sensation on my feet. What are you doing? Put him down now, Karl shouted in panic, his face full of a smug smile. It began to turn red faster than Cedric. Please, be quiet, my lady. On the other side, Cedric grabbed Karl's ankle tightly with one hand. The other hand held a high-heeled shoe and wanted to help Karl put it on. Karl with a flushed face, wanted to kick the guy in the face, but he seemed to lose all his strength when the other party grabbed his ankle point at the same time. He also felt that the hand holding his ankle was trembling slightly. The calmness on her face was just a disguise. The princess in black quietly waited for her clumsy knight to put on her blood-red high heels, but reality is not a fairy tale after all, and the result will naturally not be very good. After struggling for a whole minute point, Karl looked at his feet, the high heels with the straps tied incorrectly. He couldn't help but smile and started to perform as usual, mocking her in the tone that Theodora Grindelwald should use. "That's a really unique way to dress, Mr. Ludwig. Just as unpredictable as your movements." Faced with the ridicule, Cedric lowered his head sadly. He was certainly not so stupid that he couldn't even help someone put on a pair of high heels, but when he held Karl's ankle, he found that he couldn't control his hands at all. The hands that could write the best code in the world were as clumsy as a wild boar at that time. At the same time, even so, he couldn't explain why he did such a thing. Now that he thought about it carefully, it might be that he was a little unwilling to accept it. Even now it is the same. So he spoke unconsciously. "I know I was wrong, but your clothes are not meant for me alone to admire." As soon as the words came out, Cedric woke up instantly, and he suddenly felt a chill on his back. He raised his head in panic and wanted to explain, but the moment he raised his head, someone pinched his chin with his hand. Karl, or Theodora Grindelwald, stared at Cedric with cold eyes and said expressionlessly, "Please remember, Mr. Eisenstein, that the moment we set foot on the European continent, we cannot be like we were in Britain and the United States. You act recklessly according to your own will. This is the continent with the largest number of wizards in the world, and the conservative base of the entire wizarding world. We can never be sure how many eyes are watching us when the plane lands. Magic can block the sight of those muggles, but it can never stop them. I understand." Cedric, who had regained consciousness, quickly got back into the state, trying hard to make his expression look like that of a calm German. He nodded seriously, and then tried hard to recall all the precautions written on the note. Like a professional butler, the gentleman gracefully helped Karl to stand up. "But when the long golden hair brushed past my ear, I didn't know if it was an hallucination or something else." A gentle voice sounded in his ear. "This dress is not meant for you alone to admire, but you are the first one to see it." In an instant, it seemed like a dream. Meanwhile, on the other side, a majestic ancient castle stands in the Alps. A boy stands on the balcony of the castle tower, gazing at the majestic Alps in the distance. Behind him, the interior of the castle was gorgeous and exquisite, and the magnificent chandeliers illuminated the entire hall. The walls are covered with exquisite murals and tapestries, showing the history and legends of the castle. Countless ragged house elves were busy in the castle. Some of them were using magic to decorate it. Some were using magic to clean up the tiny details, and the constantly used disapparition magic produced bursts of loud noises together with the whistling cold wind outside the castle. It formed a wonderful symphony. Kevin Lestrange leaned on the railing of the balcony. The Alps in the distance were covered with snow, forming a beautiful snowy landscape. In his hand, he held tightly an open gold pocket watch. On the inside of the pocket watch cover was a beautiful photo. And it was the profile of a beautiful girl. Looking at the photo in front of him, the boy's thoughts might have drifted away with the snow and wind on the mountain. It wasn't until a rough voice behind him pulled him back to reality. "Kevin, my child, you have been absent-minded every day since returning to France. What are you thinking about?" Chapter 357 Confused Father and Unhappy Son. "It's nothing, Father." Kevin Lestrange turned around and looked back. He only saw his father, the patriarch of the French Lestrange family, standing behind him without him noticing. At this moment, she was looking at her son with a smile in her eyes, compared to her slightly haggard look half a year ago. Now he is more like a superior, exuding confidence from head to toe. "I know you're thinking about a lady, but you need to understand reality to even be qualified to stand beside her. It will take hundreds of thousands of efforts, and only the best young people in the entire European wizarding world, only then can you have this honor." Louis Lestrange looked at his young child and gave a serious exhortation. "I know, Father." Kevin Lestrange nodded to his father with the same seriousness. This is how the father and son get along with each other. Without the usual laughter and fights, there was only a calm conversation, like that between a king and his ministers in the Middle Ages. I know you can understand. You have always been a very sensible child. I'm proud to have you. I read every undercover report you sent back, and overall there aren't any major problems. That Dumbledore heir is indeed very charming. You ask me in your report, why do we respect and even worship our opponents? In fact, this is not shameful or scary. Instead, it is a sign of seriousness, just like the feeling between you and Dumbledore. Your grandfather once told me that he always believed that there was some kind of special relationship of mutual appreciation between you and Dumbledore. After their unique father-son chit-chat, the conversation naturally turned back to work. Louis Lestrange spoke first, affirming his son's work and explaining some of the doubts that the other party had raised in the report. Is that so? Kevin Lestrange nodded slightly, but his tone and eyes were not as firm as before. Seemingly not completely convinced by his father's explanation, he lowered his head and muttered to himself, is it really just mutual admiration? What else can you do? Hearing this, Louis Lestrange, as a father, looked at his son with a strange expression. As a traditional wizard of noble blood, he is also deeply influenced by his Christian wife. Louis Lestrange was totally at a loss to understand what his son was saying, and could not imagine that it might have another meaning. At the same time, in order to ease the awkwardness between the two, he began to turn the topic to work. His expression suddenly changed, and he looked at his son seriously. Let's not discuss this topic for now. After all, this feeling is very subtle. Just keep it in your heart. Don't write it down in your report in the future, so as not to give anyone a handle against you. Yes, father. Kevin Lestrange nodded in agreement. Seeing his son so well behaved, Louis Lestrange was very satisfied, not realizing that it was because of his decision. The bloodline inheritance of the French Lestrange family will face considerable challenges in the future. At this moment, he just looked at his son with a smile in his eyes, nodded slightly, and prepared to turn around and leave. But as soon as he turned around, he seemed to remember something, turned around silently, looked at his son and said, oh, by the way, there is one more thing I forgot to tell you. It's about the other person in your report, that commoner wizard called Cedric Diggory. You gave him almost as much space in your report as that Dumbledore's heir. Is this role important? And judging from your report, the other party is like a person with a pumpkin head every day. A stupid clown performing in a circus. If that's the case, you should have kicked him out earlier. It will help you do your job better. Kicked out? Haha. Originally, Louis Lestrange just wanted to remind his son to be more decisive in his actions. However, he did not expect that. As soon as he said this, his son sneered strangely, and the expression on his face became very strange. There are 5 points of dissatisfaction, 3 points of grievance, and 2 points of powerlessness. His entire body was shaking slightly, like a volcano about to erupt. What's wrong with you, kid? Louis Lestrange looked at his son, swallowed fearfully, and stretched out a hand to comfort him. But he didn't expect that the volcano would erupt just by saying one sentence. It should have been me. Kevin Lestrange's face was grim and his voice was hysterical. Whether it's doing the complicated data, managing thousands of accounts, or providing professional advice on all the plans, even the itinerary arrangements could be compared professionally. I helped him make $500 billion in less than a month. I helped him to arrange things in Washington and put together a professional team of political brokers at the lowest price. I helped him win over members of Congress and arrange funding for key departments of the federal government. I did everything. Why? Why do you favor that useless stupid pumpkinhead? Besides, he's prettier than me. You are totally out of shape and you have a sweet tooth. Sooner or later you will become as fat as a pumpkin. What? Louis Lestrange was shocked by his son's hysterical outburst. I was so frightened that I took several steps back, but the more I listened, the more I felt something was wrong. He quickly interrupted his son's venting and looked at him strangely. Kevin, I have never believed that the advantages that an excellent male subordinate should have include appearance and figure. Why do you have such a weird idea? This question from his father was like a bucket of ice water pouring down on Kevin Lestrange and chilling him to the bone, making him sober up instantly. He stuttered for a long time without uttering a complete sentence, and in the end, he could only apologize sincerely. "I'm sorry, Dad. I lost my temper. I just thought I had done something wrong." He didn't get the rewards he deserved. That Dumbledore's heir is a damn biased bastard. I accept your apology. Hearing this, Louis Lestrange finally breathed a sigh of relief. He comforted himself that his son was still very young, and it was normal for him to have such emotions. He should give encouragement to the other party, so he spoke immediately. "Dumbledore's heir, like his adoptive father, is a hypocritical bastard. It is normal for him to behave like this, so you should stay rational and understand your position. Your dedication and hard work have been seen by Mr. and Ms. Grindelwald. Has never been stingy in rewarding those who are loyal to him. I believe that your efforts will be rewarded accordingly." "Yes, father." Kevin Lestrange nodded firmly. He believed what his father said. And just as he nodded, a hysterical cry for help suddenly came from above his head. "Help me." Chapter 358, Hidden Pit and the Cat about to explode. Before the voice faded, dust and smoke rose up, and accompanied by a dull sound, a pitch-black object fell directly on the marble floor in front of the two people. The speed was so fast that it even cracked the marble floor. If it weren't for the two legs that were still shaking. The father and son thought that the man in front of them was dead. How embarrassing. Sir Ludwig von Eisenstein. That is the way to greet someone when you visit their home. Just as the father and son were about to throw the unidentified object in front of them out of the window into the Alps, a pair of bright red high heels fell from the sky and stepped directly on the back of the object. Looking up along the high heels, I saw a beautiful face with a sarcastic smile, and her long golden hair was a little messy. Those sapphire eyes made Kevin Lestrange feel a sense of deja vu for a moment. "Welcome to my castle, my dear lady. May I offer you my loyalty?" Before Kevin Lestrange could think carefully, Louis Lestrange beside him hurriedly pulled his son to half kneel on the ground. He folded his right hand across his chest, showing the highest courtesy to the heir of Grindelwald. "There is no need for such a grand ceremony, Mr. Kevin Lestrange. Can you help me up?" Kevin Lestrange was half kneeling on the ground and bowing his head, trying hard to recall in his mind why he had a sense of deja vu. "Theodora Grindelwald." That cynical voice sounded again. Kevin Lestrange then raised his head slightly, only to see a slender white arm stretched out in front of him. Above is a beautiful face with a playful smile. With just one glance, Kevin Lestrange's heart seemed to be surrounded by a warm current, and all the pain and doubts disappeared. He felt his heart beating faster, his palms sweating, and he even seemed to have forgotten the aristocratic etiquette he had learned. He stretched out his right hand stupidly, but was not brave enough to grab the white hand in front of him. What? A broken piece of wood. After a full 30 seconds, Karl stepped on Cedric's back. Unable to keep her balance, she cursed inwardly and grabbed Kevin Lestrange's right hand without any ladylike manners. With the support of the other's arm, he jumped off Cedric's back. "What?" As the pair of red high-heeled shoes landed on the ground, a shrill scream was heard. It turned out that when Karl landed, his calves were tortured by the high heels and he really didn't have much strength. When jumping off Cedric's back, he didn't control the distance well, and poor Cedric fell unconscious to the ground. The palm of his right hand was hit directly by the heel of the high-heeled shoe, and the severe pain woke him up from his coma. He ran around the corridor of the castle while screaming desperately with his right hand raised high. Looking at the figure running around frantically, Kevin Lestrange, who was holding Karl's right hand, became more and more upset. He would never forget the golden mask on the other's face, and judging from the back, even though the guy in front of him was wearing a loose wizard robe. But he always felt that just looking at the back was disgusting. Who is he, and why can he always be by your side? With various emotions accumulated, Kevin Lestrange actually questioned Karl, who was dressed as Theodora Grindelwald, face to face. His emotions were extremely intense, and the hand that he had not dared to clench just now tightly grasped Karl's right hand. "Watch the way you speak. Let go of the lady's right hand. Where have you learned your manners and etiquette?" Seeing his son in this state, Louis Lestrange almost had a myocardial infarction on the spot. He had witnessed with his own eyes the fire that illuminated the entire Berlin and the air raid tower that even tens of tons of explosives could not demolish. It was reduced to ashes under the blue flame. But at this moment, Kevin Lestrange seemed to be deaf and could not hear his father's reproach. He grasped the white and slender hand tightly, his eyes wide open, staring closely at the pair of blue eyes in front of him. He looks like he won't give up until he achieves his goal. His name is Ludwig von Eisenstein, and he is the candidate saint that my grandfather arranged for me. He has been serving as my personal bodyguard and is one of my loyal subordinates. Karl looked at his mad cat and replied with a smile in that sundear tone that only Theodora Grindelwald used. Then he turned his head and looked at the anxious Louis Lestrange, who deliberately asked, I think Mr. Lestrange should know this surname and should have heard the story of their family. I know. Of course I know. Louis Lestrange wiped the sweat from his forehead and nodded quickly. Eisenstein is a famous pure-blood wizard family in Germany. Their ancestors even had high titles in the real Muggle world. There are even a few girls who married into the Prussian royal family. It's funny to say that they have the last name of Dumbledore's heir. It's the same surname as the Prussian royal family, Hohenzollern. I remember the name of Queen Eisenstein's husband. I think his name is also Karl Hohenzollern. What? As soon as Louis Lestrange finished speaking, two incredible questions rang out at the same time. Kevin Lestrange's face was filled with anger, and Karl almost couldn't maintain his performance. A distorted expression, as if constipated, appeared on that beautiful face. Damn. Old man, he even tried to trick me with his name. Wait until I get back. This is what Karl thought in his heart. Why are these people always ahead of me? Why are even their names so disgusting? Why? What's wrong with me? After hearing what his father said, Kevin Lestrange didn't know why he always felt that the back of the person running around in front of him was like a clown. It is slowly overlapping with the back of a person who is full of stupidity. In just a moment, I had this unwilling thought, and this emotion was out of control. Even though he was holding his goddess hand at this moment, he still felt inexplicably uncomfortable. Seeing that his cat was about to explode, Karl felt overwhelmed, and at the same time he had a vague feeling the other party may be about to guess Cedric's identity. In order to keep this drama going, Karl could only take a deep breath and decide to sell his looks. He stretched out his remaining left hand and gently placed it on Kevin Lestrange's face. Looking at him with a smile, lift up the other person's tightly clenched right hand. Said proudly, although it is not yet time for the dance, you do not seem to be ready to give up on Mr. Lestrange. Ah. You planning to dance with me right here? Then your right hand shouldn't be so stiff. It should be placed around my waist. Chapter 359. The Dance of the Princess and the Puppet. The Glory of Rejection. As he spoke, Karl grabbed Kevin Lestrange's right hand and slowly placed it on his waist. When the trembling white arm wrapped around the charming waistline, the boy who had been feeling indignant just now, his entire face turned red, like a red-hot iron ball, visibly turning red. The extremely high temperature seemed to evaporate all the moisture on his face. A cloud of white mist formed above his head, and the professional and serious Kevin Lestrange disappeared. Only a helpless young man was left. At this moment, he was like a puppet, and could only be manipulated by Karl, the puppeteer. At first, the joints of this puppet seemed not smooth enough and its movements were overly stiff. There was a hint of hesitation and uneasiness in his eyes. Don't resist so much. Don't you want to dance with me? Or is it because there is no music accompaniment here, which is not suitable for your status? The beautiful blonde girl looked at the cute toy in her hand with a smile in her eyes, and the puppet boy seemed to be cast under some magical spell. Because of this sentence, slowly, he began to relax, his body gradually synchronizing with the movements of the girl in his arms. They began to spin and jump on the dance floor, getting closer and closer to each other. The puppet finally came back to life at this moment. He took the initiative to stretch out his arms and wrap them around the other's waist, and the two seemed to have merged into one. There was no music accompaniment in the empty castle corridor. Only Cedric in the distance was still screaming while covering his right hand that was stepped on by a high heel. Outside the balcony are the majestic Alps with endless gales and blizzards, which are the eternal themes of the great mountains. But even with such strange accompaniment, as time went by, the two of them were completely immersed in the rhythm of the dance. Karl always had a playful smile on his face. Although Kevin Lestrange's face still looked a little nervous, his eyes were shining with excitement. Their movements became more and more coordinated, as if they were a pair of dancing partners with perfect understanding. Finally, the music that had never been played before slowly stopped, and the two figures separated, and the young knight slowly knelt down. The noble queen stretched out her right hand, and it was unknown whether it was due to some mysterious force or some other reason. Karl spoke to Kevin Lestrange in a tone that could be described as seductive. "I allow you to kiss my right hand. This is an honor and reward given to you, of course, if you think it is a reward." These words instantly sobered Kevin Lestrange, who was still a little dizzy. After dancing, he slowly raised his head, looked at the white back of the hand, so close to him, and swallowed involuntarily. Then he quickly lowered his head, not wanting to look at that face, but turned slightly to look behind the other person. That bastard who was still running around in the corridor like a clown, screaming loudly. "I refuse," Kevin Lestrange said dully with his head down. "Oh, it seems that I didn't meet your expectations." Karl looked at him with a smile and shook his head slightly. "Ah, you out of your mind? This is a great honor, and you dare to refuse the reward from the young master, you damned fellow. This is a serious disrespect." As soon as Karl finished speaking, Louis Lestrange, who had been watching from the side, immediately started shouting loudly. He angrily scolded his son for his ignorant behavior. In his opinion, Kevin Lestrange's behavior was undoubtedly extremely stupid. Facing his father's rebuke, the professional and calm Kevin Lestrange seemed to be back again. He suddenly raised his head and looked at Karl, staring at the face he had been thinking about day and night for a long time. He said it seriously without changing his expression. "I refused only because I thought I was not worthy of the honor myself. I knew I might be the first wizard to enjoy such an honor, but it's not nearly enough. If you want anything else, just say it boldly." Karl's smile was warm and charming, making people irresistible. Just looking at that smile, Kevin Lestrange was deeply attracted, but he knew that he could not indulge in such a short-lived honor. "I want the honor to be mine alone, forever." Kevin Lestrange spoke seriously, then slowly stood up, stretched out his left hand, and pointed at Cedric behind Karl with disgust. "Especially not allowing fools and idiots like this to stay around you." After saying that, he turned around and left. In less than a moment, his figure disappeared in the long corridor. He waved his sleeves, and not a single cloud was taken away. His movements were smooth and graceful. Karl kept looking in the direction where the other person disappeared. After Kevin Lestrange's back disappeared for a full 5 minutes, Louis Lestrange felt under great pressure. He quickly ran to Carol's side and apologized sincerely. "Dear ma'am, I apologize to you for my own son's behavior. Please forgive his youth and ignorance, and please don't be angry." "Who said I was angry?" Carol looked at the other person. "You said you weren't angry, but your face is already red." Louis Lestrange lowered his head in panic. Hearing this, Carol quickly stretched out his hands and touched his face, and sure enough, he felt a little hot. He couldn't help but glance in the direction where Kevin Lestrange left, and said with some resentment in his heart, "It's all that cat's fault. I was just teasing him with good intentions, but he insisted on saying something weird. But it's strange. Why did my face turn red? It must be because of that damn magic. There must be something wrong with the way my brain thinks." "You said you were not angry." Louis Lestrange saw that his little master was staring in the direction his son left. His expression became even more nervous, and he continued to explain hurriedly. "He is like this. He must keep the things he likes to himself and never wants to share them with anyone. When he was a child, if his toys were touched by other children, he would rather destroy them than share them with others. He is absolutely loyal to you, but his methods are a little lacking, so please don't be angry. If you really can't help it, I will catch him back now." "You can use whatever magic you want to torture him, as long as you keep him alive. I'm not angry. Karl's eyes began to twitch, but you kept looking in the direction he left. Louis Lestrange was still a little worried. I'm not angry. Karl's eyes began to twitch violently, and his tone became more serious. But your face is so red. Louis Lestrange was still a little unwilling to believe it. I'm not mad, Karl screamed hysterically. He stared at the middle-aged man in front of him with fiery eyes and spoke word by word. I told you, I'm not angry. My blushing is just because of the cold wind. Do you understand? I'm not angry. Don't ask this question again. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 360, War and Peace Between One Thought, the real object of negotiation. After being yelled at by Karl, Louis Lestrange was like a golden retriever scolded by his master. He lowered his head and walked aside silently, his whole body filled with sadness seeing this scene. Karl felt his eyes twitching wildly, and he even looked at the middle-aged man in front of him with a little suspicion. I learned about this from conversations with Aunt Wenda Rachel and some other wizards when we first met. The patriarch of the Lestrange family in front of him is a powerful wizard called the Lion of France. By many French wizards he has always been known for his tough character, but today I feel like something is amiss. It's not a French lion at all, it's just a big French orange cat. It looks like a tiger, but it's a little fatter and very timid. But even if Karl had 100 questions in his mind, he couldn't ask them now. Besides, the time he had spent with the other person was short, so maybe it was just his illusion. So he considered returning to his solemn and dignified appearance. Later she gave the order directly in a tone that a queen should have. Don't dwell on this issue anymore. Don't forget why I came here. Is the person I'm meeting with ready, dear? Mr. Lestrange, you don't really think that I came to this castle just to enjoy a Christmas dinner? Of course, my lady. Louis Lestrange half knelt on the ground, put his right hand on his chest and saluted elegantly. The patriarchs of pure-blood wizarding families throughout France, and some important Ministry of Magic officials, they all arrived before dinner. Needless to say, the Germans, if the journey is not too long, they like to pay attention to the classical decency. I'm afraid they will arrive faster than us Frenchmen. As for some other Eastern European countries and some other wizards who are unwilling to cooperate, Louis Lestrange became a little hesitant, and while he spoke, he would secretly glance upward from time to time to observe the changes in expression on Karl's face. Of course, Karl also noticed this, so he continued the other party's words without any hesitation. We cannot invite them. They are still unwilling to join us. They are still unwilling to sacrifice themselves for the greater good. Still unwilling to fight for the true freedom for their compatriots. Yes. Louis Lestrange lowered his head even lower, not daring to have any more thoughts of peeking. The gentle and graceful female voice above his head sounded more terrifying to him than the howling alpine wind outside the window. Compared to his young son and other young wizards, they would be attracted by the beautiful appearance of the one in front of them. As someone who had heard his father talk about this many times at the end of the previous generation of Grindelwald, he knew better than anyone what this surname represented. He understood even more clearly that the organization founded by this surname was not just an ordinary political group. It was an utterly violent organization that once intimidated the entire European magical world with violence and fear. As long as the other party is willing, this lady is more beautiful than Helen, who is said to have caused the Trojan War. A Trojan War in the European magic world can be launched at any time, and it will definitely be larger in scale and more brutal. And now, he is like a herald outside the ancient Roman Senate, quietly waiting for the decision of the building behind him. In the end, you have to choose between a parchment that represents peace or a Roman javelin that symbolizes war. It seems that they still have illusions and believe that Dumbledore's successor across the ocean can lead them to a different path. But I never thought that freedom gained through money and conspiracy would never be more reliable than freedom gained through iron and blood. Some things can never be obtained without bloodshed and sacrifice. Carol tried hard to play Theodora Grindelwald, and at this moment she was like the famous Russian empress in history. When facing opposition, his expression was calm, but his tone was as cold as frost. It seems like just a minor problem, and any force that dares to resist will be crushed to pieces by the European steamroller. Louis Lestrange couldn't help but tremble when he heard these words. He was afraid that the other party would give orders directly in the next second. Use the black veil that covers the entire Paris to call on Grindelwald's followers, and use the blue flame to turn Paris into a torch that shines brighter than the air raid tower. Just as his mind was racing with thoughts of what might happen next, a warm and delicate hand gently rested on his shoulder. Feeling the pressure on his shoulder, he slowly looked up, only to see a face more beautiful than an angel, looking at him in confusion, with her finger pointing in another direction. Mr. Lestrange, I just called you many times. Why didn't you respond to me? Send a wizard or house elf to help Sir Ludwig von Eisenstein down to rest. You'd better give him something to shut his mouth. Don't you think he's been making a lot of noise? Karl pointed at Cedric, who was still yelling, and said with an impatient look on his face. Hearing this, Louis Lestrange nodded quickly, stood up hurriedly, and shouted loudly into the air, Timo, where have you been? Hurry up and help this respected gentleman to heal his wounds, and give him some pain-relieving potion. This is Grindelwald's order. Yes, master. I have always been here. It is an honor for Timo to serve the respected company. Timo is the happiest house elf. As soon as Louis Lestrange finished speaking, there was a burst of air around him. After a moment of space distortion, a house elf with strange eye patterns like a red panda appeared. Appearing in front of the two, this house elf looked very unhealthy, with a skinny face and a sly look. He was wearing a rag-like ragged garment, and when he saw Carol, he started screaming like crazy. This, such a noble bloodline, full of charm like the sun, just to be able to look at you. Let Timo die now, and there will be no complaints. You will definitely become a great emperor, like your father, a one-of-a-kind magical king, the king of magic. Shouldn't it be the queen? Louis Lestrange first saw his own house elf talking nonsense in front of his little master. He had originally intended to teach the other party a lesson, but after hearing what he heard, he felt that his house elf was completely useless. I can't even tell whether the person in front of me is a man or a woman. On the other side, Cole was sweating profusely and quickly changed the subject. Get this ugly guy out of here right now. I need to have a discussion with you before the formal dinner meeting begins. May I, Mr. Lestrange? Of course there is no problem, but Louis Lestrange nodded repeatedly, but a trace of embarrassment appeared on his face. After a brief silence, he kicked the house elf aside until he saw it take Cedric away. He clasped his hands together with some embarrassment and spoke in a low voice. Only if you really want to negotiate with the person who can decide the wealth and power of the Lestrange family, then I think that person should not be me, but my wife. Chapter 362. Karl is a bit tortured. There is no need to talk in such a private place, and there is no need for you to test me again. I don't like sweets. Karl looked at the hidden chambers in front of him, as well as the pink macarons in the hands of Mrs. Joseph beside him, who wanted to feed him dessert with her own hands, and couldn't help but sigh. This secret room is hidden in the deepest part of the castle. Outside it are maze-like corridors and constantly changing random magic. The location of the entire secret room is very secretive, but the decoration inside the room is of a different style. The room is elegantly decorated, with exquisite oil paintings hanging on the walls, soft carpets on the floor, and a faint floral scent in the air. And between Karl and the others, there was a cute and exquisite small table. There were several classic French pastries on the table, and the first thing that caught my eye was macarons. This small and exquisite dessert is colorful, crispy, and has rich and varied fillings, including chocolate, strawberry, vanilla and many other flavors. The second is a croissant, which is golden and crispy on the outside, soft and delicious on the inside, and exudes a rich buttery aroma. In addition, there are French cream puffs with a crispy shell and sweet cream filling inside, which are very memorable. The whole room was filled with an extremely sweet atmosphere because of these desserts. Mrs. Joseph even changed her imposing fire-style long dress and wore a pink medieval princess dress wearing white lace gloves. She looks like a delicate doll point, and if Carol hadn't resisted desperately, the other party would have even prepared several sets of skirts for himself. She even wanted to play the mother-daughter game with herself. At this moment, this wife and mother was poking Carl's delicate face with her slender fingers. She pouted and complained, "Just eat one piece. These are all made by me. There will definitely be no safety issues. Don't be so stubborn. Compared to your appearance, your personality is really not cute at all." Hearing this, Karl, who had been silently enduring, laughed angrily and turned his body slightly to escape the opponent's finger attack. He stared at the beautiful lady in front of him with squinted eyes and asked in confusion, "Since you know to use honorifics when talking to me, why do you still do this? Do you think in your heart that Grindelwald's heir is willing to play such a boring game with you? Or do you simply not care about my possible anger?" The end of these words was a naked threat, but Mrs. Joseph Lestrange did not show any panic. She just gracefully put the pink macaron in her hand back on the plate, and then quickly took off the white lace on her hand. She casually threw it aside, and then directly unzipped the back of her Baroque-style pink dress. Seeing that his subordinate's mother was about to change clothes in front of him, Carol instinctively covered his eyes and shouted in panic, "What are you doing? This is no longer a matter of impoliteness. This has risen to basic courtesy. Please stop this behavior immediately." Hey, Karl thought that his threat would at least make the other party stop, but he didn't expect to only hear the other party chuckle. The hands that he had covered his eyes with were forcibly pulled open. He didn't even have time to close his eyes. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not a crazy woman. This is at most an excessive joke, not a humiliation, and judging from your reaction, it seems that my judgment of you was not wrong. You are not what many people in the Saints think you are. You are a powerful person with an iron fist like your grandfather. You still have a bit of kindness in your heart, because only kind people will cooperate with others in joking, especially when it comes to jokes that are too extreme. There needs to be a certain degree of tolerance." Mrs. Joseph Lestrange looked at Cole with a smile and said these words calmly and indifferently. Opposite her was Carol, who was standing there in a daze. He stared straight at the woman in front of him, his eyes filled with unspoken anger. There was no erotic scene in front of him as he had imagined. This strange lady was wearing a gorgeous Baroque dress. He was also wearing a fashionable white t-shirt and tight jeans. At this moment, she no longer had the elegance and composure she had before, but instead revealed a sense of wildness. He crossed his legs and held a Caporal lady's cigarette in his mouth. "Who are you? Why are you putting on such a show? What do you want from me? Intelligence or something else?" Karl stared at Joseph Lestrange, who was smoking, and his tone no longer contained the respect for his elders that he had just maintained. But talk about cross-examination nakedly. Joseph Lestrange did not answer these questions directly, but slowly blew out a smoke ring. He smiled at the alert Karl, flicking the ash gracefully while speaking slowly. "You don't have to doubt my identity. I'm Joseph Lestrange, the wife of Louis Lestrange and the mother of Kevin Lestrange. I believe that with your ability to judge, you have already made a basic judgment about my identity. I'm different from you, right? You are a muggle," Karl said coldly, "but this is a serious problem. A pure-blood wizard family that has always been revered by the French wizarding world as a pioneer of wizard supremacy. The patriarch of his family married a muggle. I have heard some rumors about this before, but I never dared to be so sure until the moment you kissed my forehead just now. I was sure that there was no fluctuation of magic in you. So, Karl, or Theodora Grindelwald, suddenly had a special prickly ashwood wand in his hand. He raised his wand and pointed it at the woman in front of him, questioning in a cold tone, "Please explain the series of actions you just took. Otherwise I will just rely on your kiss on my forehead. I will burn you to ashes. How dare you, a lowly muggle, touch the flesh of Grindelwald's heir? This is already a capital crime. This is already a capital crime." Joseph Lestrange shouted in panic. "Then what should I do? Should I kneel on the ground and beg for mercy? Forget it. I think it's better this way. It was obvious that the lady's panic was fake, and her exaggerated acting made her look like a circus clown. And while she was speaking, she deliberately stood up and approached Carol step by step. Until the magic wand touched the surging blood in her chest, this strange woman suddenly opened her arms and pretended to be extremely sad. She wiped her tears and shouted loudly, "If I must be sentenced to death, I want to die in the arms of a lovely girl like you, and before I die, I must give you a good kiss." Chapter 363. Some familiar figures. "Don't come over here." He saw that his soul and body were about to be doubly destroyed. For the first time, a look of panic appeared in Karl's eyes, and almost instinctively he fired a spell. Imprison. Incarcerus. Immediately, at such a close distance, the spell hit the opponent without any suspense, and the red magic light bound Mrs. Joseph's whole body. After making sure that the opponent was unable to move, Karl used flash magic to distance himself from the opponent, and was 5 meters away from Mrs. Joseph. Look at each other with an extremely complicated look. Before coming to France, Karl had imagined countless difficult scenarios, including debating with wizards who stubbornly advocated wizard supremacy. Engage in dirty exchanges of interests with those pure-blood wizard families who hold huge resources. Even in extreme cases, you can call on Professor Snape for support, and send those guys who are completely unwilling to cooperate into an eternal and happy dream. But he never thought that he would encounter such a problem one day. Carol looked at the French sister with a good figure in front of him, the mother of his subordinate, and couldn't help but frowned. When Joseph Lestrange noticed that Karl had refocused his attention on him, his expression changed almost instantly. From the pervert who looked like a pedophile just now, she turned into a dignified and elegant aristocratic woman again. Even though her whole body was restrained, she still tried to maintain her elegance, threw her hair aside, and turned around with difficulty to look at Carol. "There's no need to look at me like that, and there's no need to doubt anything," a great Eastern philosopher once said. "Without investigation, there is no right to speak. Without observing you, I must find a way to get close to you and understand you. Only when I have enough data can I make the best choice for the family." Hearing that familiar famous quote, Cole was a little dazed for a moment, and he did not remove the magic from the other party. It's not that he was afraid that the other party would threaten his life, it's just an instinctive vigilance. The speed at which the other party changed his expression just now was something that even I, with my god level performance, could not have done. The ability to change one's facial expression smoothly and fluently at will, changing one's temperament as well. He had only seen it in one person before, his damn wild father, Gellert Grindelwald. It is a skill that has been honed over and over again, a skill that is automatically developed through years of training and interaction with countless different kinds of people. No magic or performance is required, just a special ability similar to biological instinct. When Karl thought about this, his scalp couldn't help but feel a little tingling, because based on the previous theoretical inferences, a fact can be proved. In other words, this French wife with a supermodel figure has the same experience as Grindelwald of the previous generation. Since he entered the magical world, this was the first time that someone surpassed him in knowledge and experience. What was even more terrifying was that the other person was a muggle. After thinking this through, Carol took a deep breath and solemnly asked his first question. "Answer my question." Just like the famous philosophical saying you just said, if you don't investigate, you have no right to speak. I need to know everything about you. I can't show any sincerity to someone I can't control at all. What was your last name before you got married and changed it to your husband's last name? That's a good question. Mrs. Joseph laughed and leaned against the wall. While ensuring your body balance, try to stand straight to make yourself look more like a communicator, rather than a criminal being interrogated. Before I answer this question, I also want to ask a few simple questions. Is this a threat? Karl said impatiently. If I don't answer your questions, you won't tell me any information. Please understand the situation you are in, ma'am. Don't be fooled by my appearance. I'm not a good girl. Don't speak so hastily and harshly. Mrs. Joseph pouted her lips, just like before. Almost in an instant, the supermodel, who was still maintaining her elegance, turned into a grumpy little girl again. It's just a mutual transaction. I need to have enough conversations with you before I can have a deeper judgment and understanding of you. At the same time, you don't have to deny that you have been trying to understand me as much as possible through the conversation just now. And my first question isn't a difficult one at all. I just wanted to simply ask why you wanted to know my maiden name. Hearing this, Karl thought for a few seconds, then spoke calmly. The reason is very simple. Based on our previous communication and your special ability to control facial expressions, I can basically judge what career you were in, or what position you were in, before you married your current husband. You must be able to frequently come into contact with countless people of all kinds, and they must be big shots in the upper echelons. Only in such a complex environment can you be so close to them. Only then can we develop that instinctive awareness. So, you think my Muggle surname is very noble? Mrs. Joseph smiled slightly and turned back into the elegant supermodel point. He looked at Carol with a smile and said in a doting tone, "But, darling, have you ever considered that I might just be more capable, so I'm rising faster in my career?" It quickly climbed to a very high level. Impossible? Karl shook his head calmly. "I don't deny that judging from your current performance, your ability is definitely very strong. But there is one thing that we have to consider, and that is your age. You are still very young. We can use the most scientific method to match you, assuming you graduate directly from college at the age of 18 and find a career that meets the above conditions I mentioned. It can be summarized into a few simple categories: high-level lawyers, high-level accountants, and high-level doctors. You can't do any of these three professions because they require a lot of experience." While speaking, Cole was trying hard to observe the lady in front of him, hoping to capture some useful information point, but unfortunately, the other person's expression hardly changed. He just kept looking at him with a smile. Helpless, Cole could only continue analyzing. Then, there is only one profession left that meets all the requirements: high-level civil servants or parliamentarians. And to become a high-ranking civil servant and parliamentarian at such a young age, one must have strong political capital. I can't think of any way to obtain this kind of innate political capital, except through blood inheritance. After all, this continent had been at war for hundreds of years before the 20th century, and those dozens of crowns were constantly circulating among those few families. This land, known as the birthplace of modern politics, is actually more conservative than anywhere else on the planet. Chapter 364, The Dark Mother. Wonderful, really wonderful. A hint of surprise flashed across Mrs. Joseph's eyes, and then they softened. The corners of her mouth rose slightly, revealing a faint smile, and she spoke in a self-deprecating tone. "Indeed, Europeans nowadays have too much of a sense of superiority. We claim to be the inventors of democracy and the pioneers of modern human civilization. We have so much to boast about, including the brilliant Industrial Revolution and the legendary Age of Exploration, Britain's British Empire, France's Napoleonic Empire, Newton, Adam Smith, Voltaire. Whether it's science, economics, or philosophy, Europe is far ahead." But she slowly lowered her head, and there was a hint of tragedy in her self-deprecating tone. "It really seems that the unrivaled Europe ended its glory with 2 world wars. You are right. Compared to any other region on Earth, this continent is actually the most conservative. Nowadays, many young people are beginning to pursue fashionable environmentalism and multi-gender protection, but many of them simply won't demand a change in the underlying logic of society, the political logic, the Spanish International Brigade, capitalism, and imperialism, and other ideas have long been forgotten by young people. Those passionate years have disappeared. All that's left is a dead silence." Hearing this, Karl looked at the lady in front of him with some disbelief. Ever since he came into contact with the magical world, he had never heard anyone discuss this issue, discussing those familiar yet unfamiliar terms. But he quickly suppressed his emotions and asked with his face still as cold as ice, "I have no interest in discussing those political ideas with you, and I can completely identify you as a potential traitor if you discuss these ideas. You should know that our organization's ideology has always been wizard supremacy, and you haven't answered my previous question yet. Wizard supremacy. It's nothing but the wizard version of racism. Mrs. Joseph laughed disdainfully, the sarcasm in her words not even concealed at all. She squinted at Carol and shook her head firmly. No, you are absolutely not that kind of person. You don't like this idea at all, and you know it very well. This kind of thinking has no chance of success in this day and age. Very good. I think I have obtained the first information I wanted to obtain. Then I'll answer your first question as well. Before I married Louis, my last name was Charles de Gaulle. The moment he heard that resounding surname, Carol couldn't help but sigh softly in his heart. Sure enough, just as I expected, the other party's last name is unusual. Just as Cole was thinking about how to continue asking questions, Mrs. Joseph suddenly asked, since you haven't thought of the next question yet, how about I ask you a small question first? After saying that, Mrs. Joseph stared at Carol with a smile. Carl instinctively wanted to resist, as if his spider sense had been triggered. The rational mind told him that the woman in front of him was very dangerous, just like that damn wild dad of his. The questions he asked might make him extremely embarrassed. But just when he was about to refuse, Mrs. Joseph spoke in a very seductive tone, as if she had anticipated it. If you are willing to let me ask this question, then after this strange meeting is over, I can not only show you the photos I promised to give you, and I can send you those photos. Carl was stunned. The bug in his brain seemed to be triggered again, and his entire brain stopped thinking. He stared blankly at the woman in front of him who was using his son's dark history as a bargaining chip, and was speechless for a moment. But thinking of his strong cat, he had to admit that he was a little moved. Just as he was swaying, Mrs. Joseph couldn't wait any longer, and she pretended to be a gossipy little woman. He asked hurriedly, my question is very simple. I just want to know if you like my kind and slightly stupid child. Motherfuck. Carl cursed in his heart. It was just as he expected. The person in front of me not only has an unpredictable personality like that guy, but also has the ability to change his expression at any time. At the same time, their interests are exactly the same. They only like to pay attention to these embarrassing private lives. But compared to directly responding to Grindelwald, Carl still had to try to maintain some elegance at this time. After all, he is currently playing Theodora Grindelwald, the noble princess of dark magic. So he asked back in the most controlled tone possible, is it appropriate to ask this question now? Although he is your son, he is also my subordinate. From the perspective of the entire Saints organization, he is my loyal servant. Is my love necessary for him? Of course not. Mrs. Joseph looked worried again, but I just want an answer. Why? Carl continued to suppress his anger. Because you are too smart and charming. My stupid and naive child is likely to be played with by you, as if he were a dog. As a mother, I certainly don't want to see this happen. Mrs. Joseph took it for granted. Stupid and naive. Carl's eyes twitched wildly as he looked at the woman in front of him whose face was full of self-righteousness. He asked with some disbelief, you sure that the two adjectives you just said are used to describe Kevin Lestrange? According to some internal information I have, his behavior is definitely not stupid. It can be said that he is quite smart and capable. At times, he can even be called ruthless. As for his innocence, there is no need to talk about it. I heard that he was studying at Boxbaton's Academy of Magic in France. I have always had many girlfriends around me. That's just a rumor and a disguise. Mrs. Joseph explained slowly, with your intelligence, it's impossible that you can't analyze these details. As his mother, I know better than anyone how sensitive and pure this child is. You must have heard his father tell some stories about him when he was a child, such as not wanting to share toys with other children. I don't want to explain these stories, but I want you to think about the other side of them. In a family like ours, children will never lack toys, but why is he unwilling to share with others? That's because once this kid sets his mind on something, he will devote everything he has to pursue it. If he can't get it, he would rather destroy it than give up. Chapter 365. Mrs. Joseph 039 S memories of love. What do you mean by saying these words? Karl had a vague bad feeling. Mrs. Joseph squinted her eyes and looked at Carol with a smile on her face and said in a doting tone, "Don't you understand? My silly little baby has found the most important treasure in his life. He will do anything to stay by your side, even at the cost of his own life. But Mr. Eisenstein next to you seems to have the same feelings towards you, even though he looks silly. But I can sense that he has other feelings for you, and it's definitely not the loyalty of a subordinate to his master." Karl's brain started to freeze. When he thought of the two people beside him, he felt really embarrassed. He didn't know how to deal with this relationship, and just when he was in trouble. Mrs. Joseph on the side couldn't help laughing and shook her head. "It seems that my guess was correct. When I asked this seemingly simple question, your thinking obviously slowed down a lot. This behavior has proven that you have feelings for both of them. You are beginning to feel a little embarrassed, no?" Hearing this, Carol jumped up and explained in panic with a flushed face, "Absolutely not. I'm just thinking about how to handle the relationship with my subordinates. As a leader, this is an issue that must be handled well, otherwise it will probably cause chaos in the organization. I'm their leader. How could I possibly?" Mrs. Joseph made a silence gesture with her hand, slowly opened her squinted eyes, and stared into Carol's eyes. "Don't try to explain. The more flustered and nervous you appear, the more it proves that my guess is correct." "No," Karl said stubbornly, "your logic is not supported by evidence." He spoke in a strong tone, but in the process of speaking, he unconsciously looked away from her, looking at the cute girl in front of him who turned her head slightly away and didn't dare to look at him. Mrs. Joseph smiled even more brightly, and she deliberately lowered her voice and spoke in a coaxing tone. "Indeed, in terms of emotions, no matter how great the magic or how advanced the technology is, it seems to have lost its original magic. None of them can explain why love appears, but we can use the simplest method to prove it. That is to use existing facts to make simple proofs, such as me." "What?" Karl looked at her strangely. Mrs. Joseph shook her hair, revealing her face which, although showing some signs of aging, was still beautiful. He said with confidence, "I was still studying at M-Lion Business School at the time, and I can honestly say that I had the best looks and body shape in the entire university. Basically, I can match your current status in the European magic world. There are countless outstanding men pursuing me, but I didn't have any feelings for any of them until I met Louis." When talking about her husband's name, this unpredictable lady always has a strange smile on her face. It was a smile that was a mixture of happiness, worry, helplessness, and a little bit of regret. With this smile, she began to recall, due to reasons well known to the wizarding world, the Lestrange family was being purged by the entire European wizarding world at that time. In order to preserve the family bloodline, they sent some of its important members to the Muggle world. Louis was one of them at that time. At that time, he was far from being as big and strong as he is now. He was short and ugly, and his whole body was filled with depression, but just one look was enough to seal his fate. "What?" Karl looked at the older sister in front of him, who was feeling moved by herself and had no idea what she was talking about. He said with disdain on his face, "There are countless loopholes in your words. I admit that love is very complicated and cannot be explained by conventional logic, but how could a school beauty from a top private aristocratic academy fall in love with a down-and-out aristocrat from the magical world at first sight? Even a third-rate novelist wouldn't write a plot like this." "What? An inconsiderate little rascal." Mrs. Joseph, whose memories were interrupted by Carol, pouted in dissatisfaction and turned into a sulking older girl. Then the sulking older girl slowly raised her restrained right hand. He raised his white palm to the level of Karl's eyes, and then his lips did not move at all, and no light was generated. A beautiful yellow iris appeared in her palm. "How is this possible?" Karl's eyes widened, and he kept shaking his head. He was 100% sure that this was not some amazing magic trick. It is real magic, but isn't the person in front of me a muggle? How could she use magic? And during the whole process, there was no fluctuation of magic power. Nothing is impossible. Mrs. Joseph looked at Carol with a smile on her face, showing the little flower in her hand. This is indeed a magic, and it is considered to be a very lowbrow magic. I think a wizard like you who has seen a lot of things can do this. I've probably never seen such boring magic before. At the end, Mrs. Joseph paused and finally used the word boring to describe her magic point. Indeed, as she said, there is no such boring magic in the magical world point. Although wizards have different personalities, some are cruel by nature, some are kind by nature, and most are mediocre point. But no matter whether they are the great wizards who have left their names in history, or the notorious dark wizards, or maybe there are ordinary wizards wandering in some corner of the world, and no one studies this kind of magic point, because this kind of magic is completely useless. Although the flowers that are conjured up have entity, they do not have the nature of matter. It cannot be used to brew potions or sold. After losing its magical support, it will quickly wither and disappear. No wizard would be foolish enough to waste precious magic power just to conjure up a few flowers for viewing. But it's beautiful, isn't it? What? Karl was still trying hard to search for records about this magic in his mind. Mrs. Joseph raised her right hand and suddenly spoke calmly. It's beautiful, isn't it? At least this flower is beautiful. He conjured up a whole field of flowers for me when I was saddest and most confused. A whole field of irises under the white moonlight was so beautiful. Chapter 366. Extremely boring magic. What do you mean? Cole was a little confused. Mrs. Joseph also noticed this and said apologetically, I'm sorry, I was a little willful just now and immersed myself in memories. I think you haven't remembered the inventor of this magic yet. In fact, there is no need to recall it, because the inventor of this magic is my current husband, Louis Lestrange. Mrs. Joseph smiled, a very sincere smile. The woman carefully placed the small flower in her hand on her chest. I was only 6 years old in 1960, and Europe had just recovered from the shadow of World War II. My whole family returned to France from the United States to live with my distant uncle, General Charles de Gaulle, a famous French hero during World War II. My parents were very excited at the time. They finally returned to their homeland that they had longed for, but for me, it was a disaster. Mrs. Joseph sighed. It seemed that the memory was not a good one. She continued with a lonely look in her eyes. For a little girl who was born in the United States and speaks a thick American accent, how could those proud French kids treat her well? They isolated me, excluded me, laughed at me for not speaking French, and even made fun of my last name. Laugh at me as a de Gaulle who can't speak French. Finally, after one episode of bullying, I couldn't stand it anymore and sneaked out of the academy. I ran all the way to the forest behind the school. I didn't know how long I ran until the moonlight shone on me. I just realized that I was completely lost. I have to say that this lady is really a good actor. While recalling the past, her body also began to move in line with the story. She slowly squatted down against the wall and curled up into a ball, looking like a girl lost in the forest. There were trees all around me, and I couldn't tell the direction at all. I could hear all kinds of wild animal noises all around me. I was so scared at the time. Just when I was about to burst into tears, I found that someone else had started crying before me. Louis Lestrange? Karl asked appropriately. That's right. Mrs. Joseph nodded with a smile. The cry was so loud that it echoed throughout the forest. I was about to cry, but the noise made me feel annoyed, so I just followed the sound of the crying and went over there. I found him crying under a big tree. Do you know what I did at that time? Mrs. Joseph asked Cole with interest. Carol did not spoil the fun. After thinking carefully, he spoke calmly. Based on your performance just now, you are very likely to go up to him and kick him first, then put your hands on your hips and point your finger at him directly. Ordering someone not to cry is of course not going to work, and you'll probably hit him. Hearing this, the smile on Mrs. Joseph's face became even brighter, and she kept nodding her head. I guessed everything right. I severely punished the crying kid and ordered him to stop crying. I took out all my anger at being bullied on the other person, but in the end, when the other person really didn't cry, I couldn't help crying again. Then our Mr. Lestrange, after seeing you crying, immediately became at a loss and tried desperately to comfort you. And then he found out that he couldn't comfort the other person at all, so he finally performed that magic trick. This time, without waiting for the other party to ask, Karl spoke directly to answer Mrs. Joseph on the side was not angry either. She wanted to open her arms to show Karl how big the sea of flowers was at that time point. As a result, because her hands and feet were bound by magic, she could only open her palms as wide as possible, which made her movements look very funny. She looked like a penguin that couldn't touch its own belly, but even so, she didn't feel embarrassed. His eyes sparkled with excitement as he spoke excitedly. Yes, the sea of flowers was this big at that time, with irises of various colors floating gently in the moonlight. That was the first time I saw magic. It was so beautiful. The moment I saw those flowers, all the grievances and pains disappeared in an instant, and I ran around like a boy in the flower fields. Finally, I dragged him around in the flower fields until I was too tired, and then I slowly fell asleep. What happened next? Karl asked. Even if this story is very cliché, I want to hear the ending later. Mrs. Joseph nodded slightly. The plot was indeed a bit cliché. When I woke up, I was already in my mother's arms. She held me and cried non-stop, and I kept telling them everything I saw at that time, but they didn't believe my story. They thought I was just dreaming because I was too tired. But I always believed that it was not a dream, because even though the flowers have disappeared, I can still smell a hint of fragrance at the tip of my nose until you met Louis Lestrange again. Karl spoke up again. Yes, Mrs. Joseph nodded slightly. I recognized him the first time I saw him. You're still so cowardly. It's ridiculous that you're still bullied by muggles, even though you have magic. But it didn't matter by then. What a beautiful story. Karl clapped softly, but his face was extremely cold as he looked at the woman in front of him. Said with disdain, if this were an essay or a short story, I'd probably give it some credit, but if you want me to believe this is reality, I can only say that it's a bit too much bullshit out there. Even if it's Mr. Louis Lestrange, this story happened to you when you were a child, and your heart hasn't changed at all. But as time goes by, how can you be sure that he hasn't changed? People change, whether they are wizards or muggles. As time goes by, who knows what the other person will become. It's a fascinating story, but I still can't believe you. I will leave this castle as soon as possible after all the rude things you said and did before. I can pretend that I know nothing, but the Lestrange family will pay the price for this. Karl turned around expressionlessly and prepared to leave, but just as he was about to leave the secret room and end this ridiculous conversation that made him feel embarrassed. Mrs. Joseph suddenly said in a disdainful tone, what if I tell you that he taught me this magic? Chapter 367 Anger and Patience, and the Real Problem. Carol turned around slowly and saw Mrs. Joseph holding up her right hand with the golden iris still blooming in her hand. Both of them focused their eyes on the flower. You are absolutely right. When a person grows up completely, he will forget his youth. I was the same at that time. I just wanted to give it a try and tease this old acquaintance. I followed the example of the girls who bullied me before and cornered little Louis in a remote corner of the corridor. I threatened him severely that if he didn't teach me how to use magic, I would tell other people that he was a wizard. The iris was reflected in Mrs. Joseph's pupils. Her eyes were gentle and distant, as if they had traveled through time and space. The ethereal voice spoke slowly. I thought he might resist, be scared, terrified, or even run away, but I didn't expect this. He just held one of my fingers like a gentleman and put his index finger in the palm of my hand. He looked at me with a silly smile on his face and said, no problem. Time seemed to stand still at this moment, and Mrs. Joseph seemed to be immersed in those beautiful memories and unable to extricate herself. And Karl, who was sitting opposite her, didn't seem ready to break this beautiful moment. He stood there silently waiting until the other person's eyes began to turn back. Then he asked calmly, what happened next? Don't tell me that the moment he held your hand, you learned magic and sang praises of love and beauty. That plot is a bit too cliché. Carol's question made Mrs. Joseph very unhappy. The beautiful elder sister rolled her eyes and said unhappily, "Of course it's not that simple. In fact, nothing happened that day except that I was taken advantage of. I couldn't see any trace of magic. In the days that followed, I kept torturing little Louis and forcing him to teach me magic. I don't know why I had such a bad temper at that time. I was so arrogant and totally out of character. It wasn't until later that I realized that it's just that I have some inferiority complex." Carol answered for her. "When you first met, you were still very young. You don't understand the difference between wizards and muggles at all. But as you grow up, you gradually come into contact with more and more people. You begin to realize that there is a world of difference between wizards who have magic and muggles who cannot use magic, and you begin to feel inferior about your identity." "That's right." Mrs. Joseph seemed even angrier. Her lips pouted. "I did have some inferiority complex at the time, but I hid it very deeply. So at that time I turned this inferiority complex into anger and vented it on little Louis. If it were an ordinary person, he would have given up long ago. What's more, he is a wizard. He knows better than anyone that muggles cannot learn magic." As her memories deepened, Mrs. Joseph's expression became more colorful. Sometimes she frowned, as if she was recalling those times when she was furious, and sometimes she smiled so brightly, as if someone was making her happy in her memory. He finally said with relief, "Finally, just when I was ready to give up, he didn't want to give up on me. That was the first time he took the initiative to ask me out on a date. We went to the rooftop of a building together. The moonlight was beautiful at that time. I arrived there in advance to wait for him. After waiting for a long time, he finally showed up with a huge backpack on his back. I thought this guy finally got the hang of it and wanted to do something romantic. But I didn't expect that when this guy opened his bag, he would pour out a bag full of books, all about botany. He picked them up from the ground one by one, passed them before my eyes one by one, and explained them to me in detail one by one. Finally, he suddenly held my hands, looked into my eyes and spoke seriously. Magic is imagination, a concrete manifestation of human imagination. It should not be defined. Some people can use it as a weapon to kill people. It can be used for in-depth research, or to treat human diseases, or simply to satisfy idle fantasies. Since it is a fantasy, there is no question of whether we can do it or not. It is just that our imagination limits us. If we can't use magic to construct the structure of flowers, then we can start with Muggle science and the distribution of plant cells, to see their color changes, their growth process, and to construct the pattern of flowers using brains instead of magic. I believe that as long as you work hard, you will succeed. Even if it takes a very long time, I'm willing to stay with you and wait for you forever. I don't believe that magic only shines in the hands of a few people." Mrs. Joseph also added her own body movements and performances as she recalled this memory point. Even though her hands and feet were still bound by magic, she still disregarded her image and wanted to recreate the scene like a slave. It is conceivable that the memory must be very beautiful and important to her. It can make a lady completely disregard her image and try hard to recreate the scene at that time. What's the next story? Carol had already walked from the door to the other party, staring silently at Mrs. Joseph. He spoke with his face as cold as iron. "If you don't want to say it, let me infer it. If I'm not mistaken, you have already learned this magic at that moment." This is indeed a very beautiful story, and I have to admit that I was somewhat moved. But as a leader, what I care about is never the story itself, but the meaning behind the story. Just like Mr. Louis Lestrange at that time, and the effort you showed, this fighting spirit is certainly worthy of praise, but it also reveals a dangerous signal. You and your husband do not believe that magic will only shine in the hands of a few people. That is to say, you do not believe that wizards are more noble than muggles, and you do not agree with the principles of the saints. This Question made the temperature in the entire secret room become much colder. Karl also took the wand in his hand again, pointed it at the lady in front of him again, stared into her eyes, and spoke seriously. Compared to the previous rude actions and the time I wasted, this issue is the most important. Please answer me honestly, ma'am. I need to re-evaluate the loyalty of the Lestrange family. Faced with such a direct threat from Carol, Mrs. Joseph still had a smile on her face. She stared at the pretty girl in front of her with an adoring look on her face, then slowly moved forward and pressed her chest against the tip of the wand. He shook his head slowly and said, I can honestly tell you that, Louis, and I do believe that magic does not only shine in the hands of wizards. We don't believe wizards are any more noble than muggles. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 368, Great Wizardism. That's not a very good answer. Karl showed a weird smile on his face and slightly moved the wand in his hand away. At the same time, the tip of the wand began to flash an ominous green light. The green light reflected on that beautiful face, making that beauty even more sinister and terrifying. Mrs. Joseph did not show any fear on her face, and she continued to look at the girl in front of her with a doting look. He even deliberately kept his body pressed tightly against the other's wand. This is not a smart choice. Karl pulled his wand back a little and said in a threatening tone, don't think about angering me. With the conversation we just had, I can kill you right here, and I can also gain the support of many European wizards. I have no reason not to do this to gain both fame and fortune. Yes, you can get support. Mrs. Joseph still had a smile on her face, but her tone and temperament became much more serious. She demonstrated her unique skills again, and in an instant, she was a beautiful wife immersed in beautiful memories, turned into a negotiator who seemed to be of the same status as the person in front of her. But you're going to lose the war in the end. Haha. What a joke. Karl sneered and looked at the lady in front of him with disdain. The Saints now control the entire European wizarding world and over 80% of the pureblood families. They also occupy over 90% of the senior positions in the Ministry of Magic of each country. Other resources are almost the same proportion. From what I know, Dumbledore's successor has indeed made a name for himself in the British wizarding world, but he spent nearly 2 years and failed to take down even one British Ministry of Magic. It's ridiculous. Just based on the group of peasants he has won over, he is not worthy of being compared with me. Carol was of course acting when he said this, although he had been somewhat broken down by the woman in front of him before. But he was very clear that he was now playing the role of Theodora Grindelwald and needed to be vigilant at all times. That's why he is willing to play this game with the woman in front of him all the time. On the one hand, to get to know her more deeply. On the other hand, he really thought that the other person was very interesting. The most interesting person since he entered the magical world. The first person I met who could raise objections to my theories in the political field. On the other side, Mrs. Joseph was still fearless at this time. She looked straight into Karl's eyes for a long time. He spoke slowly while smiling and shaking his head, although I can't be sure. I always feel that when you said that just now, your eyes seemed to be a little evasive, like a very deep disguise, and certainly we are not discussing that right now. As a leader, you can learn from your grandfather and become an iron-fisted dictator. All wizards whose loyalty is not absolute can be considered absolutely disloyal. Therefore, there is not much problem in eradicating it. After all, absolute thoughts can always attract ordinary people who are unwilling to think. But wasn't Grindelwald defeated because of this? You are really brave. Carol's eyes were filled with anger that could not be concealed. Go on. It was strange to hear the lady in front of me openly discussing the failure of the previous generation of Grindelwald. Karl's interest in it became even stronger. You know, in the hearts of wizards in the Saints organization and even in the entire European magical world, Grindelwald is 1,000 times more terrifying than the wizards in the British magical world who are terrified of Voldemort. You have to know that the so-called mysterious man has been dead for more than 10 years, but the real Dark Lord is still alive and well in that high tower, and now Mrs. Joseph actually started to discuss the other party's failure directly. This can no longer be described as bold. It can be said to be arrogant. And the other party's subsequent behavior is indeed worthy of this adjective. Mrs. Joseph looked at Carol and saw that he had no intention of killing her. Then, as if he had made some kind of decision in his mind, he spoke loudly with full force. Wizard supremacy is already trash that can be swept into the dustbin of history. Even if it is a powerful and charismatic wizard like your grandfather, it is impossible to make such a thing a success. I heard that more than 10 years ago. An ugly madman also appeared in the British Isles across the channel. He wanted to use this theory to turn himself into a new demon king, but ended up making himself a joke and died at the hands of a baby. Then, what do you think we should do? Tell me your opinion. The anger in Karl's eyes dissipated a little, and he began to ask questions. Mrs. Joseph keenly caught this point and immediately took advantage of the situation. Grand wizardism. What? Cole was a little confused. Mrs. Joseph raised her hands to show the other party that her hands and feet were still tied. Without a moment's hesitation, Karl lightly snapped his fingers, and the spell that bound the other party was immediately broken. Mrs. Joseph, whose hands and feet were untied, first blew Cole a greasy kiss. Then he quickly ran to the side and knocked on a brick wall that looked like an ordinary wall. After pressing a few hidden bricks, the bricks of the wall immediately retreated to both sides like water. A hidden compartment appeared in front of the two people, and Mrs. Joseph took out a large bundle of messy parchment from the compartment. He placed it in front of Karl, then rummaged through it briefly, and finally handed a brand new A4 paper to Karl. What is this? Looking at the A4 paper with wet ink in his hand, Karl couldn't help but frown. Mrs. Joseph was as excited as a child, dancing and explaining, "This is the wisdom of the second greatest politician, the first political philosopher, and the first theoretical thinker in the wizarding world, the guiding document for the future European Wizarding Federation government and the original template for grand wizardism. This set of profound political philosophy mainly includes the following aspects. First, independence. Wizards must be qualified to decide their own destiny and future. The second type of pan-nationalism defines the identity of wizards based on whether they can use magic rather than using bloodline to differentiate them. The third, European Union. The European continent is our base. We must integrate all our forces to fight against the threats from the British Isles and across the ocean. The fourth is the Eastern policy. Since Dumbledore's successor has already placed his stakes on the United States across the ocean, he hopes that through financial means and the new magic reforms he brings, the entire wizarding community can be embedded like a gear in the already operating Muggle world. Then, we might as well look eastwards and look for some living space there, or even seek the opportunity to establish an independent country. You have to know that the situation over there is not stable at the moment. Chapter 369. That familiar feeling. After listening to Mrs. Joseph's impassioned speech, Carol couldn't help being stunned. This was the first time he heard someone other than himself in the wizarding world come up with such a political agenda. Still a little excited, he thought about it carefully and then spoke in a cool tone. If I heard correctly, it should be the famous Charles de Gaulle doctrine, but not the French version, but the wizarding world version. I'm happy to hear someone say such insightful words, but considering the current situation, if I declare that what you just said will serve as the political program for our Saints organization's future work, it is very likely that the Saints will split tomorrow. You must know that this organization has been a completely violent organization since its inception. They don't appreciate this kind of slightly compromising political platform, not to mention the existence of Dumbledore's successor. At this moment, many wizards may only be able to fight. Of course what you said makes sense. Mrs. Joseph smiled and looked at the girl in front of her calmly. But it's not really a big problem. Not a big problem? Carol sneered. My dear lady, do you want to listen to what you just said? This is a matter of life and death for the saints, but it's not a big deal in your mouth. It's a bit too optimistic. I'm not saying this to deny the importance of this matter, but I just want to emphasize that the situation may not be as bad as you think. Mrs. Joseph smiled, stood up, found the open wall again, and rummaged through the pile of documents inside. Soon he walked up to Carol with a pile of reports and threw the papers on the small table in front of the two of them. This is the intelligence that the Lestrange family has been collecting over the years about the pureblood families in Europe. It contains very detailed data that proves that times have changed. It is no longer half a century ago. There aren't many wizards left willing to sacrifice their lives for the greater good. Many pureblood families act tough and prominent at various gatherings, most likely just for political show. It is only to exert a certain amount of political pressure on the local Ministry of Magic, and thus gain bargaining chips. Look here. Madam Joseph took out a statistical report on magical crimes in major European countries. There are clear broken lines and bar graphs above, indicating the number of serious illegal and violent crimes that have occurred in major European countries in the past 10 years. According to this line graph, we can clearly see that magical violent crime is showing a clear downward trend, especially in the past 10 years. The downward trend has become more and more obvious, with the annual decline exceeding 15% and even exceeding 20% in some years. And this, Mrs. Joseph took out another report on the types of magical violent crimes and the beliefs of the people. And through this report we can see that there are still some violent crimes involving the use of magic, but the main groups and categories are no longer the organized, revolutionary groups of the past. When she said this, Mrs. Joseph paused for a few seconds and finally chose to use this word to describe the Saints organization. 80% of the cases are basically due to financial disputes, and some are perverts who study black magic. Violent crimes stemming from political struggles have basically disappeared, and those people are shouting very loudly in front of you. But in reality, they are more reluctant to shed blood than anyone else. Looking at the documents covering the table, Karl suddenly felt dazed. These documents were obtained through careful logical reasoning, and numerous data reports. The method of drawing conclusions after professional analysis seems so familiar he couldn't help but look at the profile of the person in front of him, and suddenly couldn't help but smile. It was true that like mother, like son. On the other side, Mrs. Joseph, who was working, was still expressing her views, based on the data points. She said with a calm face and a firm tone, based on these data, I can responsibly assure you that what I have just said is absolutely feasible. Besides, politics itself is a game of compromise. We can say one thing and do another, just like those old guys are doing now, and I can assure you that, if you are really willing to implement this plan, those guys might actually start to support you. After stating her point of view, Mrs. Joseph raised her head proudly, like a cat waiting for praise from her owner. Looking at the proud wife in front of him, Karl's feeling of deja vu became even stronger. They are exactly the same, except that the person in front of him has a more eccentric personality, a bit like his wild father, capricious and unpredictable. His own cat, on the other hand, seems much more reserved, which may have something to do with his father, who looks strong, but is actually gentle and cowardly. If you think about it carefully, this family is really weird. Of course, Karl couldn't reward the wife in front of him the same way he rewarded Kevin Lestrange, and he had a very strong feeling in his heart. If I reward her by patting her head, she will definitely hold me in her arms and ravage me severely. So Karl ignored the longing look in Mrs. Joseph's eyes, turned his head, and raised his head proudly and said, your proposal is very good and your analysis is very professional. I can accept this point of view with some difficulty, but before we fully implement it, I need to ask you one more question about Dumbledore's heir. You know, in the minds of many people in the Saints, I have become the Dumbledore and Grindelwald of the new era. People want to see this simple binary opposition, which means that we must oppose the methods being implemented by the other side, whether they are right or wrong. In this case, how should we face this heir of Dumbledore? HMPH. Mrs. Joseph who did not receive the reward, immediately showed an unhappy expression on her face. The extremely professional and capable female politician just now disappeared in an instant and turned back into a pouting and sulking girl. Seeing this, Karl felt his eyes twitching wildly. They were exactly the same. Even their tempers were exactly the same. After staying here for a full minute, the other party still refused to speak. Karl could only sigh silently, then stretched out his right hand and gently stroked the head of the lady who was old enough to be his mother. Then in an instant the whole person was embraced by the other person, and his face was rubbed wildly. Like a frightened kitten, Karl desperately pushed the other person with his hands, and after a fierce struggle, he finally got free. On the other side, Mrs. Joseph, who was already very happy, said happily, "It's simple. We should cooperate with Dumbledore's successor." Chapter 370, The Real Politician. Mrs. Joseph. What? Mrs. Joseph's words made Karl, who had just escaped from the clutches of the devil, feel like he had been taken advantage of for free. He stared at the other person with wide eyes, his eyes full of grievance and anger. The images of the two people reversed in an instant, and this time it was the black cat that was angry. Seeing this scene, Mrs. Joseph hurriedly wanted to comfort Karl again, but just as she stretched out her right hand, he was scratched harshly by the cat, and the back of his hand was ruthlessly slapped aside by Karl. After being hit, Mrs. Joseph had to give up her comfort plan and changed her expression to speak seriously. "Please, don't doubt me. I was not possessed by a ghost, nor was I talking nonsense. Just judge based on my analysis. With regard to Dumbledore's successor, we should insist on cooperation rather than competition. Why? I need a reason." Karl stared at Mrs. Joseph and said angrily, "Mrs. Joseph had a calm expression and spoke slowly. The reason is very simple. From the perspective of the ultimate goal, there is no fundamental conflict between us and the heir of Dumbledore, although I haven't heard of any clear declaration from him. Based on the information I have so far, the other party will most likely not object to fighting for the true freedom of wizards. It is even very likely that they will be one step ahead of us and showcase the magical world to the Muggle world." "How did you come to this conclusion?" Karl's heartbeat quickened a little, although on the surface he still looked a little angry. But in his heart, he suddenly felt nervous and excited. It was like a musician who had been playing in a deep valley in the mountains and suddenly heard a light accompaniment coming from afar. This may be exactly what it feels like to meet a soulmate while admiring a mountain stream. Mrs. Joseph had already entered the working state and spoke seriously. "In fact, this judgment is based on my logical reasoning and is not supported by any data. The reason is very simple, that Dumbledore's successor has always been famous throughout the wizarding world for his innovative new magic. The strange gadgets he created are really attractive and have changed the lives of many wizards in the British wizarding world. But what many people don't know is that those things are not just simple magical innovations. They also have another very important attribute, which is commodities." The moment he heard the word commodity, Karl's inner nervousness completely disappeared and was replaced by complete excitement. He looked closely at the lady in front of him, and she lived up to his expectations and spoke directly. "Since it is a commodity, it needs to be sold and trafficked. The population of the British wizarding world is so small, no matter how big the market is, it can only be expanded to a certain extent. And as far as I know, the other party has already used financial means. The entire income of the British wizarding world for at least the next 5 years has been predicted in advance, which means that they will soon face a major financial crisis. The goods produced will have no one to buy, and the entire economy will be paralyzed. At that time, he is likely to do so. We can use this crisis to force the British wizarding world to follow him and turn to the Muggle world in an orderly manner. The existence of the magical world may not be exposed immediately at the beginning, but the final result should be that the entire wizarding community will become a class that controls special means of production. Being integrated into the Muggle world, the lives of wizards should undergo a great change in the process. So the possibility of being opposed will gradually decrease as the plan proceeds." "What a wonderful analysis." Cole was extremely excited, and the look he gave Mrs. Joseph became more complicated. He never imagined that with so many people in the entire British wizarding world playing chess, no one could guess his plan. On the contrary, it was the woman in front of him, a Muggle woman who married into a French wizard family in a country thousands of miles away. However, he can use the knowledge he has mastered to deduce all his plans. Even the details are very clear, so the excited Karl asked somewhat complacently, without caring about the image he was playing, "So, dear madam, what do you think of this plan?" After speaking, Karl raised his chin slightly, as if waiting for praise. Mrs. Joseph was a little confused by this question. She glanced at Karl, who was waiting for praise, thought for a while, and then spoke directly. "Overall, this plan is very ingenious and very creative, and the person who designed it is definitely a smart person." Hearing this, a smug smile immediately appeared on Karl's face. But the smile didn't last long before Mrs. Joseph changed the subject and turned to criticize. "But from another perspective, this plan is a bit too clever. As far as I know about Dumbledore's heir, he did not form a tight organization. His core circle consisted of his 2 roommates and several professors at the school. It is composed of several other students' parents. This organization structure is too loose and is completely tied up by interests, and in the early stages of the entire plan, almost no violence was used, which will lead to a very serious problem when the plan is implemented in the middle stage. The wizarding world has not yet been exposed to the Muggle world, but the living standards of wizards have improved significantly. I'm afraid that many wizards may no longer be willing to follow Dumbledore's successor and continue moving towards an unknown future. Overall, the whole plan looks like a compromise of some unbreakable rules." Hearing this, the smile on Karl's face disappeared completely, replaced by an unspeakable embarrassment. Of course, he was not unaware of the loophole in his plan, but he had already made a promise to that damn old B. There is no abuse of violence in the British wizarding world, nor is there any student grouping at Hogwarts. These 2 rules are like a tight hoop that restricts my behavior in every way, but no one has ever mentioned this to me before. He subconsciously chose to escape, but now that someone was saying it to his face, he couldn't help feeling a little embarrassed. At the same time, Karl has already been certain that the lady in front of him will be an important partner in his future. He may even become your most important political advisor in the future. After figuring this out, Karl once again played the role of Theodora Grindelwald and asked back in a leadership tone, "Since you can analyze the shortcomings of the other party's plan, then it's great that you can fix this broken plan. What amendments do you propose?" Chapter 371 Formal Talks. Hearing this, Mrs. Joseph couldn't help feeling a little confused, and she looked at Karl with hesitant eyes. "Did I hear you correctly, ma'am? This is the plan of Dumbledore's heir, even though I said I could cooperate with him, but that was based on open confrontation and covert cooperation, similar to the 1960s and 1970s. The Soviet Union, which had not yet disintegrated, cooperated with the United States to dismantle the British and French colonial systems. This cooperation was based only on common interests. It definitely does not mean a complete easing of tensions. From a global perspective, there is almost no chance of easing tensions between us and Dumbledore's heir. This involves the fundamental interests of both parties." Hearing this, Karl was not surprised at all. He continued to speak affirmatively in the tone of a leader. "I agree with you, ma'am. There will never be any chance of reconciliation between Dumbledore and Grindelwald. If the 2 sides reach a cooperation, it will cause unimaginable turmoil, but as a leader, I still hope that you can come up with some suggestions to complete the plan and help the other party improve it. It's essentially about finding the flaws in those plans better." Hearing this, Mrs. Joseph thought for a moment, then slowly nodded in approval. She spoke with a serious face. "What you said does make sense. At least in terms of your vision and pattern. I have to express my admiration for you. It is true that following the other party's plan and helping them develop and complete it will help analyze the loopholes in their plan, and it can help predict the development of the other party's future plans." After Saying that, Mrs. Joseph returned to the opened wall and looked among the pile of papers that looked messy. I started searching again and soon found the information I wanted. He returned to his previous position with the papers in his arms, flipped through them briefly, and quickly wrote a few short lines on a blank piece of paper. Then he handed the note to Karl. "These are some simple opinions," I wrote. "Given the current situation, I ask you to keep them confidential and burn them immediately after reading them. In short, there are 2 points that can be implemented for Dumbledore's heirs plan. 1 is to build a tight-knit organization with strict discipline to provide assurance against future violence. The second point is that we cannot have any mercy. While promoting the resolution of the crisis, we must also lay the groundwork for the detonation of a second crisis. We must use periodic crises to force those wizards who want to enjoy a comfortable life to unite around us, thereby leading the entire wizarding community towards a possible future." While listening to Mrs. Joseph's explanation, I looked at the simple operating methods listed on the small note. Karl suddenly felt that he had a sense of shared aspirations, and at the same time, his conscience was greatly comforted. At least compared to the methods written by Mrs. Joseph, the methods I have implemented before, and the methods I foresee in the future. They all seem too kind. At least they have never thought about completely controlling food. Creating a great famine in the British wizarding community, forcing some wizards to take risks and use magic in front of muggles. Use this as an excuse to put pressure on the British Ministry of Magic, so as to reform the British Ministry of Magic and create a real government for the wizarding world. Looking at the piece of paper in his hand, which was full of capitalist humanitarian care, Karl's guilt instantly disappeared without a trace. As expected, she is a noble lady who grew up with elite education in one of the only 2 old imperialist countries in terms of how to be inhuman. He is far ahead. While Carol was still immersed in the shock of capitalism's humanistic care. Mrs. Joseph on the side suddenly spoke again. "Now that I've come to this, I'd like to offer some thoughts about myself. We might as well expand on your idea and use the plan we are discussing now as a guide. Think about how to work with each other." Hearing this, Karl snapped his fingers, and a small blue flame immediately burned the note in his hand to ashes. Karl, or Theodora Grindelwald, had a look of embarrassment on her face. After being silent for a full 5 minutes, he slowly spoke with an extremely serious expression. "Yes, ma'am, we can continue the discussion, but just like you asked me to do, there must not be any written records of our discussion, and there must not be any verbal leaks. This is absolutely no conversation. Do you understand?" Mrs. Joseph's expression also became serious. She nodded slightly and asked in a tentative tone, "Officially start the talks." "Let's officially start the talks," Karl responded seriously. Mrs. Joseph, who received the accurate information, immediately put on a happy smile and spoke in a light tone. "Very good, little darling. You are finally willing to come and have afternoon tea with me. Come and try this delicious dessert of mine. If you don't eat, I'll be angry." "What are you doing?" Carol was confused again by the woman in front of him, and the other party seemed to have suddenly become a different person. From a sharp politician, she turned into a slightly perverted wife. He was holding a pink macaron in his hand, pressing it against his face, with a perverted expression on his face, staring at his eyes intently. Even the sound of speaking can increase blood sugar levels just by listening to it. Just when Carol was about to scold the other party and ask him why he did this, he suddenly discovered that the woman was using her free right hand to write and draw on the flat table with tea. It's amazing. Seeing this scene, Karl couldn't help but sigh in his heart. While the other party maintained the body movements. On the one hand, you can control your tone and expression, and on the other hand, you can use your free hand to write on the desktop. The entire process does not require the involvement of the brain and eyes, and Karl can guess the reason. After all, the other party is just a muggle. Even if she can use magic, it cannot change the fact that she is not a wizard. The other party does this to avoid having any scene or language recorded in his memory through his own eyes. This is only possible if one is a master of soul reading at a very high level. An ordinary wizard would never be able to get any information about this conversation from Mrs. Joseph. In other words, the memories of this period of time were deleted from her brain. by this lady using artificial power. Chapter 372, The Sulking Mother and the Words of the Tiger and Wolf. After figuring all this out, Karl began to cooperate with the other party's performance. He frowned, risking getting diabetes tomorrow. She put the pink macaron in the other person's hand into her mouth, while trying hard to put a smile on her face. Really tasty. As soon as he finished speaking, Mrs. Joseph took out another small piece of cake and handed it to him, speaking in a doting tone. My dear, how about having a taste of my cake? It's so delicious. Karl took the cake and took a bite, and a happy smile immediately appeared on his face. Seeing that happy smile, Mrs. Joseph finally nodded with satisfaction and then said something with some complaints. I said, my cakes are good, but since my children came back this year, they suddenly don't like to eat the cakes I made. He must have been blinded by some vixen outside and eaten something unhealthy, so he refused the little cake filled with his mother's love. That damn vixen, don't let me know who he is, otherwise I will poison him to death with magic potion. Hearing this, Karl couldn't help but shudder all over and quickly lowered his eyes slightly. While keeping his head up, he looked at the table. Mrs. Joseph wrote this on the desk. Generally speaking, the way we cooperate with Dumbledore's successor is not as difficult as we imagined. On the contrary, it is of great help to both of our plans. To put it simply, the specific method is that, if the other party opposes something, we must support it. If the other side is unwilling to create violent incidents, we will deliberately create them. We just need to grasp the specific timing. After reading the text, Karl waved his hand slightly, and the magic power immediately dried all the water stains on the table. He kept his own body still, using magic to draw the tea in the cup beside him, and wrote on the dry tabletop, how to judge whether the timing is right. Can you tell me more specifically? After writing down his needs, Karl turned his gaze back to Mrs. Joseph. The moment their eyes met, the other person understood what he meant and immediately lowered his eyes slightly, just like Karl had just done. After taking a look at the words the other person had written, he took a new macaron from the dessert stand beside him with a smile on his face and stuffed it into Karl's mouth. Looking at the piece of snack next to my mouth, I can smell how sweet it is even before it enters my mouth. Karl only felt the corners of his eyes twitching wildly. He did not use magic to write on the table, but looked at Mrs. Joseph with pleading eyes as if to say, do I have to eat it? Mrs. Joseph just tilted her head and gently shook the macaron in her hand in front of Karl. Karl's eyes were filled with black lines when he saw this action. This action was so embarrassing, as if the other party was holding cat snacks and teasing a proud kitten. Angry Karl puffed his face into a bun, then opened his mouth wide and swallowed the whole macaroon in one gulp. Then he turned his head to the side and chewed angrily. Mrs. Joseph smiled with a look of success, admiring the puffy little bun in front of her, while continuing to write and draw on the table with her free right hand. From time to time, I would give a few words of comfort. Don't be so anxious, little cutie. As a lady, you should eat slowly and carefully. Of course, that only applies before marriage. If you are willing to marry that silly boy in our family, I will definitely not ask you to do this, and I will definitely stand on the same front with you. Let's defend your married life together and teach that fool a lesson. Hearing this, Karl turned his head back in disbelief and looked at Mrs. Joseph with a doting smile on her face. At the same time, he secretly swore in his heart that this memory must not be found by anyone, and whoever dared to peek into this memory would be killed. It's really shameful. But no matter how shameful it is, things still have to be done. Karl continued his previous actions and turned his attention back to the words written by the other party. Mrs. Joseph wrote this. Generally speaking, the right time usually has signs before it appears, such as in the near future. A huge financial crisis will soon break out in the British wizarding world. This is a very good time for us to enter the market. On the one hand, Dumbledore's successor wants to use this crisis to continue to expand his influence. At the same time, he transformed all the wizards in the British wizarding world into the labor force in his magic factory. In the process, he will inevitably encounter some resistance, mainly from two aspects. one aspect comes from the British Ministry of Magic, because doing so will reduce their influence. They will definitely oppose it. On the other hand, there are wizards from the British wizarding community. They can completely avoid this debt crisis by coming to continental Europe. After all, this debt crisis will only affect the British wizarding world. It won't have much impact on the European wizarding world. Many British wizards have relatives on the European continent. They even have some real estate and savings. It is very likely that they will flee the British wizarding world with their family. We can help them at this time. Seeing these words, Karl nodded silently in his heart and then asked his new question in the same way. Then, how should we act? At the same time, we need to find an organizationally justifiable reason for our actions. After writing this question, unsurprisingly, another macaron was handed to my mouth. Looking at the smug smile on Mrs. Joseph's face, he suddenly felt that a disgusting old face was slowly overlapping with the face of a beautiful woman in front of him. She was another vindictive person. I just didn't eat her dessert and tied her up with magic for less than half an hour. He is deliberately looking for trouble to retaliate against me. Really, is there no one else in the entire magical world who is as magnanimous and generous as me? While Carol was sighing, Mrs. Joseph's next words could definitely be described as ruthless and ruthless. I saw this beautiful wife with her head tilted as if she was fantasizing about the future. You said that your future children with Kevin Jr. will inherit the slightly reddish hair of the Lestrange family. You still have that beautiful black hair. You'd better give birth to a lovely daughter first. I have always wanted a lovely girl, but she gave birth to a bastard boy who was seduced by a vixen outside and refused to eat even the snacks made by his mother. Hearing such vicious words, Karl almost broke down. The pent-up anger in his heart made him speak without knowing why. More likely to be blonde. Chapter 373. Mrs. Joseph. What do you mean by that? Mrs. Joseph asked curiously after hearing what Carol said. There was a sly, interrogative look in his eyes, which made Cole a little nervous. He was about to open his mouth to explain. The lady suddenly put on a thoughtful expression and spoke thoughtfully. I heard that the Lestrange family did have blonde bloodlines in ancient times. If atavism is really possible, it's not impossible. A cute blonde baby makes people happy just thinking about it. As she spoke, Mrs. Joseph suddenly grabbed Carol's fingers and said with a look of concern in her eyes, "It seems that you have done some research on the Lestrange family and have thoughts so far. It seems that you don't reject it in your heart, my silly son. When are you going to hold the wedding? Considering that you two are still young, you can postpone your childbearing age, but you need to change your usual makeup for your little one." The all-black makeup looks mysterious and calm, but for a mother, it seems a little less gentle. Karl couldn't help but curse. He couldn't remember how many times he had been completely broken down by the lady in front of him. Just when he was about to lose his temper, Mrs. Joseph finally started her work, using her free right hand to write on the table while dipping it in tea. As for the question you just mentioned, my answer is that you can start preparing now. It just so happens that at the next party, you can gradually fulfill the promise you made half a year ago. The ministries of magic in various countries on the European continent have not made any response to your previous declaration. You have no choice but to lead the Saints organization once again. Use appropriate violence to force the ministries of magic of various countries to reconsider your request. Eat the ripest fruits first. Start with the French Ministry of Magic. They know the power of the name Grindelwald better than anyone else. Looking at the line of words written with tea on the table, Karl felt a little dazed. It was really difficult for him to explain these suggestions, which sounded professional and well-reasoned. Combined with the lady in front of me, who is holding my fingers with one hand, has a slightly perverted smile on her face, and is discussing the details of her future wedding dress with me. This sense of contrast sometimes makes people feel helpless. On the other side, Mrs. Joseph saw that Carol was lost in thought and had no intention of losing his temper, so the topic gradually became more unrestrained. This mature wife deliberately straightened out her chest and looked at him with a strange and sad look. Looking at Carol's slightly flat chest, He shook his head slightly and said helplessly, I'm also deeply sorry for your tragedy, but everyone's physique is different, and small ones are cute, aren't they? And paired with your tall and straight figure, it does look very elegant, but these are not important. As she spoke, Joseph unconsciously put her hand on Carol's face. Her eyes lingering on Carol's face pointed was as if I saw a peerless beauty, and Carl's charm was indeed over 95 for both men and women. Even without the use of magic or even makeup, her facial features appear so delicate and three-dimensional, and her skin is fair and delicate, as smooth and translucent as porcelain. A pair of black eyes wearing colored contact lenses are bright and lively, and the long eyelashes tremble slightly, giving people a gentle and graceful feeling. The nose is straight and delicate, the lips are rosy and plump, and the slightly upturned corners of the mouth reveal a hint of playfulness and cuteness, as well as a sense of evil charm. This face today is enough to make everyone surrender. It is so beautiful that it is beyond words. You are like a piece of art that God has carefully carved out in 7 days, and we mortals are just randomly fabricated ornaments. It makes me jealous. I really want to take a bite. Just when Mrs. Joseph pouted her lips and was always kissed, her face was pushed away forcefully. Carl rejected it directly with a cat gesture and pushed the other person's face away with disgust. Although rejected, Mrs. Joseph still did not give up. At the same time, she was sure that Carol would not use violence against her, so she wanted to hug Carl tightly, and she had to kiss him today. Cole was forced into a corner and had to use magic to escape. Mrs. Joseph used all her strength, but failed and almost fell to the ground. The mature wife who failed to fulfill her wish, with her face puffed up with anger, returned to her seat alone. He turned his head away and sulked, with 2 lines of tears of grievance flowing from the corners of his eyes. Carl, who escaped from the clutches of the devil, stood in the corner of the room, looking at Mrs. Joseph, who was about to break into pieces, and spoke in an inhumane and cold language. There's no need to keep up the show, ma'am. I'm not Kevin Lestrange. I know you're just acting. You've taken advantage of me enough today. If you continue like this. At this point, Carol paused for a second, because an embarrassing sentence automatically emerged in his mind. That was the optimal solution he automatically came up with, based on years of logic training. The most important thing about threatening others is that the thing you use to threaten them must be something they care about. But judging from the current situation, the things that this eccentric and quirky lady in front of me likes do make me embarrassed. But considering the current situation and the means that I can use now. Carol still took a deep breath and spoke seriously in a threatening tone. If you do this again, I will never come here again, and I will never come to see you again. As soon as these words came out, Mrs. Joseph's back trembled very noticeably. The body twisted uncontrollably, like a young man who, after a long vacation, suddenly returned to work, but was still in bed. After performing a ghost possession show, the beautiful wife turned around and said with dissatisfaction while pouting, "It's a cruel threat, but it really works. Well, I think we should leave too. It's time to face those old men from the Saints organization and show off your acting skills." While speaking, Mrs. Joseph wrote and drew on the table without leaving any traces, drawing an arrow and some text on it. It is written like this: the list of attendees and some detailed information were all on that pile of papers, and there were love hearts on those papers. Remember to check carefully, baby. After writing this, Mrs. Joseph stretched and started to put on her clothes in front of Carol. She put on the elegant lace dress that she had discarded before, and then left the secret room with full aura, wearing high heels of more than 10 centimeters. Only Cole was left hiding in the corner, his cheeks twitching, as if he was about to have a stroke. Chapter 374, The Knight Who Was Busy Stealing Food and the Angry Princess. In the castle's guest room, a man in black wearing a golden mask was whispering with a monster with a huge head beside the bed. "Please forgive me, dear wizard. Timo really can't steal from the kitchen anymore. If he steals food again, he will definitely be discovered. You've eaten 6 small cakes, 2 large mango pies, and countless small candies. There are really too many." The monster with the huge head pleaded in an extremely humble tone. Just like a farmer who owes rent, He is asking for forgiveness from his lord. The Duke in black wearing a golden mask gave a firm command in extremely cold words. No, I'm here as a guest, and was brought to this room for no apparent reason. I must eat my fill. Go. Find me some food. The food you guys make here is a bit too stingy. That mango pie is only slightly bigger than the pudding I usually eat. This was certainly not some horrible evil conversation, since Karl and Mrs. Joseph went to the secret room to discuss the issue. Cedric, who was kicked on the back, was brought to the guest room by the house elf. The other party used magic to simply heal the wound on his back, and thought that after the wound healed, this guy would not be so noisy. However, I did not expect that. There are differences in character among wizards ever since he woke up. Cedric has been pestering the house elf in front of him, asking him to go to the kitchen and steal some food for him. At first, the house elf of course refused, but as a student of Hufflepuff House, Cedric knew too well how to deal with house elves, so he persuaded him. And the house elves are under the influence of the mental stamp that they cannot disobey the wizard's orders. The house elf finally compromised. At first, it thought it was just stealing some food, but he didn't expect that this was just the beginning of the nightmare. Cedric's appetite was far beyond his imagination. What's even more terrifying is that when it comes to dealing with humans, Cedric can never learn Karl's methods, but when it comes to dealing with house elves and food stealing, Cedric not only learned how to do it, but was also very brave. He followed the theory of doing bad things that Karl taught him, and when doing something bad, he did it in order to avoid being exposed and being betrayed. In the middle of the process, the best way is to pull everyone onto the pirate ship and enjoy the food. Cedric even shared some of the food with the house elf in front of him, and at first accepted the other party's praise with peace of mind. Afterwards, he used it as a handle to threaten others. You have to steal some more food and stop stealing meaningless things like before. Something like that. Focus on the desserts, especially the frosted breads and the special little cakes. It's the one I just shared with you. You ate it too, didn't you? After making the threat, Cedric seemed to be lost in his memories again, muttering to himself with an intoxicated smile on his face. Melons. Tutu, who on earth cooked those cakes? They tasted amazing, 100 times better than the healthy cakes that some people make. Really? It seems like you don't plan to enjoy the cake I made in the future. Just when Cedric had just finished intoxicating himself, a cold voice came from behind him, and the tone was so familiar he couldn't help but shiver all over. The house elf named Timo knelt directly on the ground and kept banging his big head against the floor. Said in a pleading tone, Timo is a most useless house elf. Timo should not disobey the orders of the noble Grindelwald. Timo shouldn't have stolen food. Timo must punish himself severely. As it spoke, the house elf slammed its huge head against the marble tiles on the ground. The dull noises kept coming, making Cedric feel a little guilty. He was about to speak out to stop them. His back, which had finally been healed by magic, was kicked hard again. A white foot kicked him to the ground. Oops. Cedric was kicked to the ground and saw only a pair of white feet flashing in front of him. When he looked up, all I saw was a pair of beautiful legs appearing in front of me. Karl. Oh no, it should be Theodora Grindelwald. He was sitting on the bed, crossing his legs, looking down at her, his face looking extremely ugly. Looking at those extremely dark eyes, Cedric felt that something was wrong and swallowed nervously. Finally, he forced a smile and asked nonchalantly, "Where have you been? I'm so bored here that I want to find something to eat." You look unhappy. Did the work discussion go wrong? Karl, sitting on the bed, looked at Cedric at his feet with his eyes twitching wildly. Even though the other person was still wearing the golden mask on his face, he could also imagine what kind of smile was underneath the mask. An awkward and silly one. When I think about how this guy insisted on following me here, and finally he was about to take action. He would be almost dead after just one kick. If the other party could stay with him, then he would go to see Mrs. Joseph. I wouldn't be so easily manipulated by the other party. I thought about the awkwardness of the conversation in the past hour. Cole really wanted to kick this guy in the face, but when he looked down at the clothes he was wearing, he inexplicably thought that if he really kicked this guy in the face now, point for this guy now, it doesn't seem to be a punishment, but rather a reward of some kind. This thought only appeared in his mind for less than a few seconds, and Carol felt that something was wrong. He seemed to be influenced by Mrs. Joseph. There seemed to be some irreversible changes in the way I think. No, I absolutely cannot have such perverted thoughts. Carl grabbed his head with both hands and shook his head desperately, trying to drive these thoughts out of his mind. Cedric, who was still kneeling on the ground, looked at Carl in confusion, not knowing why the other party suddenly went crazy. At the same time, the dull sound coming from beside him made him feel guilty, so he spoke in a pleading tone. "Are you okay? If possible, let this house elf leave first. It looks painful now." Carl stopped shaking his head instantly, his eyes filled with dangerous light. Without thinking or hesitation, as soon as Cedric finished saying this, Carol suddenly felt a sense of bitterness in his heart. This guy only cares about that ugly thing, and doesn't even ask himself why he is so worried and troubled. What a damn guy. Thinking of this, Carl suddenly waved his hand, and the house elf, who was still kowtowing, was driven out of the house by the powerful magic. When the house elf disappeared, the powerful magical storm blew up Cedric's hair at the temples. The slow-witted pumpkinhead realized that something was wrong and quickly asked in a concerned tone, "Oh, by the way, how was the negotiation with Mrs. Joseph? What topics did you discuss?" "No topic was discussed, just researching if I were to marry Kevin Lestrange." "What color wedding dress should I wear to my wedding?" If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 375, The First Real Quarrel. It's good that the negotiations went smoothly. I thought the other party was a difficult person. After all, it was specifically explained on the previous piece of paper. Be careful of that lady, she is. Cedric breathed a sigh of relief and spoke slowly, but halfway through his words, he seemed to suddenly remember something. He jumped up from the ground like a spring, put his face close to him, and spoke in a panic and stammering manner. You. What did you say? Wedding dress? What wedding dress? What on earth did you discuss?" Looking at Rick in front of him, the whole image was distorted because of anxiety. Carl suddenly felt a surge of refreshment rushing to his head. He kicked the opponent in the chest and kicked the dog that tried to pounce on him away. Then he said casually, "The topic we discussed is simple. I need help from the Lestrange family, and Madame Joseph is willing to help me. It's just that there is no such thing as a free lunch in the adult world. She certainly has conditions. She hopes that I can give her son a fair chance." "What chance?" Cedric asked hurriedly as he sat back on the ground. "Of course it's a fair pursuit. What else can I say?" Carl smiled contemptuously. Hearing this, Cedric immediately shouted in panic, "No, absolutely not. No, why?" Carl's expression suddenly became very serious, staring at Cedric with cold eyes. "Mrs. Joseph, you didn't inform me of such important information in advance. It seems you tricked me on the plane. You are so amused, Mr. Diggory, that you have forgotten your own part. Or do you regard my partiality towards you as a capital for your indulgence?" "No." Cedric hurriedly tried to explain. "I only had too little time to read the note. I can only remember some of the things that left a deep impression on me. I definitely am not deliberately hiding anything from you, and if I hadn't been injured, I would have told you this information." "Injured?" Cole laughed at his anger and shook his head gently. "Don't you realize that the kick on your back was not just an accident? In the past 5 minutes, you have been kicked by me twice, but you are still full of energy now, aren't you?" Hearing this, the panicked expression on Cedric's face turned dull, and he stood there thinking for a while. Then he looked at Cole with disbelief. "You used magic on me? Why did you do that? You couldn't." Carl interrupted him with his eyes slowly stood up from the bed and looked down at Cedric. He said in a cold tone while shaking his head, "Why would I do this? I shouldn't do such a despicable thing to my friends and seniors." "Is that what you mean to say? Well, listen up, Mr. Cedric Diggory, because you are not qualified. From the time we arrived in France until now, you have not been qualified or capable, or even mentally prepared, to play the role you are playing now. If I don't use magic to get you out of everyone's sight for a while, in front of that eccentric and capable lady, it won't take her more than 5 seconds to see through your identity." This sentence was like a bolt of lightning, which shocked Cedric so much that he was burnt on the outside and crisp on the inside. A person stood there blankly, with empty eyes and an extremely lonely expression. Looking at the boy in front of him, Carol did not speak to comfort him, but just walked to his side silently, patted his shoulder, and spoke calmly. "Go back to England and enjoy the rest of your vacation. I won't force you to do anything you don't want to do. Your talents are not suitable for this area. I have indeed underestimated other people in the magical world before. My meeting with that lady made me feel for the first time that I had met an equal opponent, and of course, we are still allies now, but you are not qualified to stand on this stage now. Leave as soon as possible, and don't show any flaws. See you in a week." After saying that, Carol brushed past Cedric and walked slowly towards the door of the guest room. Just as his hand was about to touch the door handle, a hysterical question suddenly came from behind him. "Did you promise her?" "What?" Karl turned his head in confusion, but he only felt a black shadow flash before his eyes, and then he was pressed heavily to the ground. He just felt the pain on his back from the floor, and when he looked up he found Cedric's eyes were red, and he stared at him like a mad lion. The two hands were like two iron clamps, holding down his shoulders tightly. "What the hell are you doing? Let me go. Have you forgotten why we came to this country? Just give it to me now, you idiot. The next meeting is very important, and I can't be late," Karl said with a grin, his eyes fixed on Cedric, who was lying on top of him. This guy seemed to be in a state of madness, with his hands pressing on his shoulders without any control over their strength. The force was so great that he felt his shoulder was about to be dislocated, and this was the first time he discovered this. Although this guy eats a lot, nothing he eats is wasted. All of it is transformed into strong, well-defined muscles. "Did you promise her?" On the other hand, facing Karl's threats and persuasion, Cedric seemed to be unable to hear any words at all. He just repeated the question once again with a grim look on his face. This action pissed Karl off a little. He was about to snap his fingers and use magic to throw this guy off him. However, he did not expect that Cedric's movements were faster. He moved his hands directly from his shoulders to his palms, interlocking his fingers and pressing Karl's palms tightly. His pupils were bloodshot, and he stared at Karl closely. Then he asked again, "Did you promise her?" Karl looked at his hands that were raised next to his ears and the terrible posture they were in. The anger in his heart grew stronger and stronger, and finally he said angrily, "I agreed. What do you want? You don't even have the courage to compete fairly, do you, Mr. Cedric Diggory, or Sir Ludwig von Eisenstein? You are such a good-natured coward." Chapter 376 KARLAN-039 S Troubles and Helplessness. "Damn it, he used all the energy he gained from eating so much on me." Carol sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his red and swollen shoulders, looking at the kicked open door of the guest room with an unhappy face. Cedric had long disappeared. After getting the answer, this guy stood up with an expressionless face. Then he ran out of the room like a madman. Carol looked at the deep corridor outside the door, his heart filled with deep helplessness, and he slowly fell backwards. "I slumped my whole body into the soft mattress, staring blankly at the luxurious ceiling above my head. When I think about it carefully, I really haven't had a single reliable subordinate along the way. Although Kevin Lestrange is extremely capable. But just thinking about that dear personality gives me a headache. Professor Snape is good in all aspects, but his flaws are too obvious. What if someone controls Harry one day? There was no doubt that Professor Snape would definitely betray him, and that he was more of a partner than his subordinate. Let alone Grindelwald. This wild father never left him any good memories, although the old bee has been helping him wholeheartedly. After all, The two people's ideas are very different. The final outcome of the old B can only be to bear the big blame and disappear from the British magical world. Go to some remote place with your wild father and live a shameless life. As for Cedric, Karl felt his shoulder rake again when he thought of this stupid pumpkin head. It's really a headache. Karl stretched out a hand and clenched it in the air, his eyes full of fatigue and helplessness. In fact, he didn't want to force that stupid pumpkin head like this, but the conversation with Mrs. Joseph had finally made him realize, or recall, how dangerous what he was about to do was. Come to think of it, his previous actions in the British wizarding world in the United States could only be considered as rebellion. I did not try to shake the ruling foundation of the British wizarding world, but just stayed within the existing framework. Keep making excessive attempts, even if they seem earth-shattering and sensational. In fact, to use the historical discourse that I learned in my previous life, it did not change the nature of society and could only be regarded as a radical reform. In addition, he had already found a vest for himself, and the identity of Dumbledore's adopted son did help him avoid a lot of trouble. But what he has to do next is not just rebellious reform. It is a complete revolution. Although I have often mentioned this word before. But when the time really came, Karl had to admit that he started to get a little nervous recalling the history of the Muggle world. Anything associated with these two words often requires a heavy price to pay. Because when you raise this banner, it means everyone from the old society and the old class, they will stand against you without hesitation, and they will concentrate all the strength in their hands to try desperately to strangle you. They even did a lot of crazy things, like when the Franco-Prussian War ended. Bismarck, Germany's Iron Chancellor, felt that the peace agreement negotiated by the Imperial Parliament was harsh and unimaginable. However, no one expected that the Paris government at that time would sign it so easily, because to the elites living in Paris, Germany only wanted Alsace and Lorraine. But the emergence of the Red Commune in Paris would kill them all. It is better to give to friendly foreign countries than to domestic slaves. Throughout history, the ideas of rulers have always been surprisingly consistent. I was planning to fall to pieces, Karl said inexplicably, and then jumped up from the bed. After using magic to change his clothes, he stayed in front of the mirror for a few seconds, then turned around and left the room. The red high heels stepped on the stone slabs, making crisp sounds, as if telling stories from the past. The long corridor in front of me seemed like a tunnel with no turning back. The murals on the walls, the beautifully carved stone pillars, and the high ceilings all reveal a rich historical heritage. It looked beautiful, but Karl felt that it was like countless pairs of eyes greedily examining him. He suddenly recalled what he had talked about with Cedric before, about the meaning of the Chinese word sacrifice. Now, he felt like he was walking towards the altar as a sacrifice. There's no turning back. Karl spoke again inexplicably. This time there was no hesitation or doubt on his face, only a pure smile. He quickened his pace, finally even jogging, and soon he arrived at the reception room. The moment the high heels touched the ground, the crisp sound was like the shout of an officer of honor. Everyone in the living room focused their attention on Karl. At the door, Karl glanced at the building in front of him. It was a standard palace reception room. There was a huge oak table in the middle of the hall, surrounded by some carved chairs. There are oil paintings hanging on the walls, depicting the past glory of the Lestrange family. The sunlight shines through the stained glass windows onto the floor, creating mottled shadows, and the most important thing is the huge Deathly Hallows flag with black background and silver lines on the wall opposite the gate. Under the flag was a gorgeous chair, which was different from the other carved wooden chairs. The chair was made of pure metal and shone brightly in the sunlight. And compared to its own brilliance, the historical significance of this chair is even more attractive. His wild father, Grindelwald, the founder of the Saints, was sitting on this chair and met his believers for the first time. So much so that after he imprisoned himself in the tower, the chair has not appeared for almost half a century. So much so that everyone in the audience focused their eyes on Karl for just 1 second. After seeing the person clearly for a moment, some people still unconsciously glanced at the chair that was emitting dazzling light. Karl couldn't help but smile. He previously thought that the dog system had only rated him at 50% of the organization's mastery. Did something go wrong? Now it seems that I underestimated these wizards at the previous meeting in Berlin. These people are much more experienced and calm than the naive people in the British wizarding world. They can hide their desires well until they see enough temptation. It was not until the second meeting that everyone saw the highly symbolic chair finally appear in front of them. The suppressed desire finally began to stir. Power is truly an addictive poison. Chapter 377. Primary school level political tactics. Karl walked slowly, his movements as gentle as a white fox on the snow. He did not run directly to the throne that symbolized power. Instead, he came to the windowsill and looked outside. The weather today is very good. The sunlight shines through the thin clouds onto the distant mountains, creating mottled light and shadows at his feet. A field of flowers looked particularly bright in the sun, with white cornflowers and tulips of various colors, and the sunflowers, which occupy 80% of the entire field, bloom under the caress of the sun. The breeze gently brushed through the petals, bringing waves of floral fragrance upwards, adding a touch of vitality to this somewhat dull room. My lady, I think we should start the meeting. Let me introduce you to the patriarchs and representatives of the families present. Everyone in the reception room stared at Carol standing in front of the window, and the situation had been deadlocked for nearly a minute. The awkwardness was not broken until Mrs. Joseph, the host, spoke. This woman was completely different from the quirky and informal person she had been when she was chatting with Carol before. At this moment, she looked like a typical medieval noblewoman, wearing a gorgeous and fluffy dress, wearing an exaggerated wide-brimmed hat and a thin black veil covering her face. She led the men behind her with elegant movements. He walked slowly behind Carol and introduced him in a calm tone. Who is this? No need. Mrs. Joseph had just opened her mouth when she was interrupted by Carol. Standing in front of the window, he pushed the window in front of him hard outwards. The tightly closed window was pushed open in an instant, and the biting cold wind poured into the room through the open window. The temperature of the entire room dropped several degrees Celsius in an instant. The moment the cold wind blew across their cheeks, it was like a loud slap in the face, waking up everyone who had been staying in the room. They were no longer in the warm and cozy castle at home, but in the middle of the highest mountains in Europe. Cold is the eternal theme here, and along with this cold comes an equally cold word. No need to introduce them. I don't need to know who they are. They just need to know who I am. Carol turned around slowly. His black eyes with contact lenses were as cold as the cold wind blowing into the room. It swept across the faces of everyone behind him, and those guys were also suddenly attacked by the cold wind, as if before. His body couldn't help but shudder. Seeing this, Carol just sneered and walked towards his seat. Looking at his leaving back, those men who were dressed in gorgeous clothes and had extraordinary demeanor all looked embarrassed. Only Mrs. Joseph had a smile on her face, but it was difficult for others to read anything from her expression. After all, this woman's expression has never changed since she appeared in this reception room. Every time someone saw her face, they would see a smile that was so standard, so perfect, and so fake. On the other side, after Karl sat directly on the chair that Grindelwald had sat on. The self-introduction and greeting parts were naturally skipped. These people could only follow the instructions on the nameplates with some discomfort and sit down in their seats. Some of them were anxiously and secretly exchanging glances, while Karl, who was sitting in the first seat, just observe these guys silently point and try to retrieve information from your memory palace that matches the people in front of you. This was the first time he met most of these people. Almost no one had shown up at the previous meeting in Berlin, including Mrs. Joseph on her left, who always kept smiling. Now that I think about it, most of those who showed up in Berlin at that time were just the apparent leaders of these families. Many of them are the grandfathers or great-grandfathers of these people. Those old guys are old and have high status, but in fact, he had no idea about the family, the resources it owned, and the specific number of family members. Perhaps they have no idea that beneath the smooth and peaceful surface, there are already all kinds of calculations. Thinking of this, Carol shook his head unconsciously and complained in his heart. Noble bloodline, 1000-year family history, never associating with muggles, pretending to be a true noble from a medieval novel, but actually learning the muggle tactics. Not a dick yet. After complaining in his mind, Karl had basically planned how to deal with these guys. Since they wanted to play power games, then I will fight to the end. After all, the level of power politics in the land where I live is very high point compared with the country I lived in my previous life. I can't even sit at the table with the children. I'm only worthy of sitting with dogs when drinking point. So the first step when children quarrel is to form cliques and find allies for themselves according to this logic. Karl turned his head first and looked at Mrs. Joseph. He did not smile, but spoke calmly. The garden downstairs is nice. The heat preservation magic is very beautiful. What kind of sunflowers are planted in the flower field? It looks very special and very beautiful. Hearing this, Mrs. Joseph immediately understood what he meant and replied respectfully with a professional fake smile showing 8 teeth on her face. It's Rat 1787. You may not have heard of it. It's a new type of sunflower cultivated by a Muggle technology company. It has the advantages of high oil yield, high seed kernel rate and high yield, and is a very excellent agricultural plant. Plants grown by Muggles. As soon as Mrs. Joseph finished speaking, Karl understood what she meant and pretended to be slightly surprised. Then his face darkened and he spoke in an unfriendly tone. Once upon a time, many wizards in the wizarding world thought that Muggles were monkeys who needed to make everything themselves. They lack wisdom, are incapable of possessing noble and miraculous magic, and are even less able to change their current situation. Now, they are able to use the power of technology to breed new species that have never appeared on this planet before, and yet here we are, meeting to discuss whether or not we should unite and make changes for the sake of the wizarding community. Don't you think this is ridiculous? The second step in a quarrel between children is to issue threats based on the topic. At this time, the language used is generally not vulgar, and it is just a verbal threat point. Based on this logic, Karl followed Mrs. Joseph's topic and briefly told everyone present. I asked you to come here for a discussion, but it doesn't mean you're really here to have a discussion. It's just a gesture of appreciation. You should start taking sides now. Sure enough, as soon as this sentence came out, a few tactful people joined in. Young master is right. There is no need to hold this meeting today. We should just hold a real loyalty ceremony. The current situation is already so dangerous. How can we have any extensive discussions? I think you have lost your minds as officials in the Ministry of Magic of various countries. Democracy and all that be damned. Chapter 378. The quarrel between the two red sticks. That is to say, the current situation is not optimistic. Even Dumbledore's successor has caused a lot of trouble in the British wizarding world. The European wizarding world, however, was like stagnant water, with no reaction at all. Some people kept claiming that they were the inheritors of Grindelwald's ideas, but in reality, apart from using it as a slogan during election campaigns, there is actually no action. The people who were speaking were all relatively young, and their seats were relatively far back at the long conference table. They were considered marginal figures in the entire organization. The several older middle-aged men who sat near Karl's seat had gloomy expressions on their faces and did not show any agreement or opposition to such remarks at this moment. These people still want to sit back and wait, remain neutral and observe the situation. Karl could only take the third step of a children's quarrel and continue to add fuel to the fire, escalating the verbal conflict into real verbal abuse. So he spoke casually. Such criticism is obviously inappropriate, and I still believe in the organization my grandfather left me, and the ability to live and fight, especially among wizards who followed in my grandfather's footsteps. I still believe that they have not betrayed their ideals and are willing to make sacrifices for the greater good. On the surface, Karl's words were meant to excuse these old guys, while also giving them a way out to start over, but it is obvious that time is the greatest magic. After more than half a century, the name Grindelwald has no deterrent effect. These noble pure-blood family patriarchs remained silent, like portraits carved out of wood. He sat upright in his seat, showing no intention of speaking. Seeing this, Karl stopped talking and just closed his eyes silently. Mrs. Joseph beside him immediately got the signal. With her right hand wearing a white lace glove, She elegantly picked up the antique porcelain teacup in front of her and began to enjoy the fragrant black tea. The young wizard representatives immediately began to speak sharply. Dear young master, there is absolutely no need for you to defend these maggots that are willing to stay in the rotten trees and rot along with the trees. They don't deserve to be forgiven at all. They are all in high positions, and their families have long histories and loud slogans, but in reality it was just a bunch of cowards and incompetents who set fire to Berlin. Even if it lit up the night sky of Berlin, it couldn't ignite the courage that had long been exhausted in these guys' hearts. They are simply a group of, at the end, a young man in his early 30s, handsome with oriental features on his face, spoke up. He stretched out a finger, pushed the frameless glasses on his nose, and said bluntly, traitors, a bunch of cowardly cowards who betrayed their ideals. How dare you? Lian Wang, don't think that, just because you are an international lawyer from the French Ministry of Magic, you can talk nonsense in a meeting like this. You are just one of the security guards for this meeting. You are not qualified to express your opinion at all. That is, we acknowledge that you have done a lot for the organization, but everyone here has made a huge contribution to the organization. My grandfather once served under Grindelwald and issued a letter to shut up, you. The final summary of this young man named Lian Wan was so heartbreaking that it directly broke the defense of the old guys present. One by one, they jumped out and began to madly accuse the young man in front of them, but he was not afraid at all and directly interrupted the speech of one of them. He crossed his arms and stared at the old guys expressionlessly, turning around. Is it day or night outside now, or is it the same time period as your grandfather? You admit that I have done a lot for the organization, but sometimes I only feel that I have done a lot for the organization. Is it for the greater good, or for the shameful desires in the hearts of some of you present here? You. These words completely broke the defense of the two old guys who jumped out, and their faces turned from white to red, and then from red to purple. It looked like a cerebral hemorrhage. Karl, who had been resting with his eyes closed, couldn't help but look at Mrs. Joseph beside him when he saw the young man's strong fighting ability. And this elegant wife, who was now holding a teacup and looking at Carol. The signature fake smile on her face was replaced by a smug smile. It's true that a good teacher produces good students. As soon as Karl saw the smug smile, he instantly understood what was going on. I sighed in my heart, and at the same time, I felt a little scared. This woman who made me embarrassed and helpless was indeed very resourceful. If I had been hasty in negotiating with the other party before, my situation today would definitely be very embarrassing. At the same time, Lian Wang, who is at the end, is still outputting. This person looks like Professor Snape, with less greasy hair, younger and more handsome. Those old guys of yin and yang with expressionless faces. If you are cowardly inside, you will be afraid of others who are brave and dare to sacrifice everything for noble beliefs. You must do whatever you can to sabotage, because the existence of those noble people only highlights your hypocrisy and incompetence. I did make a wrong point just now. You can't be considered maggots in a rotten tree, because the rotten wood and the stinking water can at least be used to irrigate the land and grow vegetables and fruits. You are just stagnant water plus harmful chemicals. In addition to breeding some flies with strong drug resistance, you can only feed mosquitoes. The offensive power of this sentence was extremely high, and it directly made the two old guys who looked like they had cerebral congestion look like they were about to have a stroke. Looking at the two old guys in gorgeous clothes, pointing their fingers at each other and trembling their besides finding it funny, Karl knew it was time for you to speak again. But just as he sat up straight and was about to speak, a dull and majestic voice sounded beside his right hand. Okay, youngsters, there's no need to be so aggressive. I know there are a lot of you out there. There is a lot of dissatisfaction with the way we old people do things slowly, but what I want to tell you is that sometimes it's better to walk slower than to run too fast and fall to the ground. How can you be so sure we didn't follow the lady's orders and complete the tasks she assigned us? End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.